There's a moment in the third season where Rick, the smartest man in the universe, has turned himself into a pickle. No arms, no legs, just a green vegetable on a workbench, and he did it on purpose to get out of family therapy. Within minutes, he has wired his own tongue into a cockroach and started building a body out of the dead. That is Rick and Morty in a single image, the smartest creature anyone here has ever met, using every ounce of that genius to avoid a room with a couch in it. Tonight, we're going through all of it. How smart every character in Rick and Morty really is, from Jerry at the bottom to the versions of Rick and Morty who quietly rewrote what the top even means. This is Paper Town, so get comfortable, turn the lights down low, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it genuinely does help us keep making these. Before we can rank anyone, we have to agree on what we're even measuring, because Rick and Morty is unusually slippery about the word smart. Most shows treat intelligence as a single dial. There is a smart character and a dumb character, and everyone else lands somewhere on the line between them. This series refuses that. It keeps taking the word apart into pieces and then showing you people who are enormous in one piece and hollow in another, and it lets those gaps do the storytelling. So when we ask how smart a character is, we are really asking 4 different questions at once, and a lot of the fun tonight is watching one person score high on one and fail badly on the rest. The first kind of intelligence is the one Rick and Morty wears on its sleeve, raw invention. The ability to look at the fabric of reality and build a machine that bends it. Portal guns, cloning tanks, a battery that runs on a universe you created and then abandoned. A serum that turns a species into the dominant life form on a planet. This is what Rick puts on display in almost every cold open, and it is genuinely the rarest thing in the multiverse. It is also, and this matters, the kind of intelligence the series is least interested in as a source of happiness. Nobody who can do these things seems to be having a good time. The second kind is cunning, strategy, manipulation, the ability to read a situation full of other people and steer it to the exact outcome you want, often without anyone noticing they were steered. This is a different muscle entirely. You can be a spectacular inventor and a terrible strategist, undone by your own impulses, and this is a point the writers will make about their central character over and over. And you can be, as we will see, a fairly ordinary inventor and a genius manipulator, and that combination turns out to be far more dangerous. The third kind is emotional intelligence, the ability to understand what another person is feeling, to be understood in return, to hold a relationship together, to know when to say the soft thing instead of the clever thing. Rick and Morty treats this as real intelligence, not as a consolation prize, and it keeps handing it to the characters who score lowest on the other scales. That is not an accident, that is the argument. And the fourth kind is adaptive intelligence, which is the strangest one, and the one that belongs almost entirely to Morty. This is the ability to be completely out of your depth, to have no plan and no special knowledge, and to survive anyway, to improvise your way through a nightmare using nothing but nerve and pattern recognition and a willingness to do the ugly necessary thing. It looks like luck from the outside. It is not luck. It is a skill. And by the later seasons, the writing is fairly explicit that it might be the highest value skill in the entire family, precisely because it does not curdle the way the others do. Here is why all of this matters before we start ranking anyone. If you only measure raw invention, the ranking is boring. Rick wins, every other Rick is close behind, and everyone else is a rounding error. That is technically defensible and completely misses the point. Rick and Morty has spent years arguing that raw invention is the least important number on the sheet, that the smartest being in the room is very often the unhappiest and the most destructive, and that the people we are quietly meant to envy are the ones who never got the invention gene at all. So as we go through the family and then out into the wider multiverse, I want you to keep all 4 scales in your head at once, because almost every character is going to be tall on one and painfully short on another, and the gaps are where the whole thing lives. There is one more piece of groundwork, and it is the biggest single fact for understanding why intelligence here is even rankable, but I want to save the full weight of it for when we reach Rick himself, because it changes the meaning of the word smartest in a way that most people who watch casually never quite register. For now, hold on to this. When you are told Rick is the smartest man in the universe, you are being told something true and something rigged at the same time. And the difference between those two things is most of the story. Let's start at the bottom, and let's start with the man everyone in the family has agreed to look down on, because he is a much better test case for what intelligence actually is than any of the geniuses. Jerry Smith is the one everybody has already decided about. He is the punchline of the family, the man Rick can barely look at without a flicker of contempt, the husband Beth keeps almost leaving, the father whose own son has watched him fail so many times that the disappointment has gone quiet. On raw invention, on cunning, Jerry is at the floor. He does not understand Rick's science. He cannot navigate the multiverse. He panics in situations that Summer handles without blinking. If you were building the ranking on those two dials alone, Jerry would sit at the very bottom and there would be nothing more to say. But the writing does not let you leave it there, and the longer you spend with Jerry, the more you realize the show has been quietly defending him the entire time. Start with the obvious version, because the series does put a genuinely helpless man in front of you. He gets lost in his own house of horrors. He struggles with jobs that other characters would find trivial. There is a running joke that he is so unremarkable that an alien species farms him and thousands of identical Jerrys in a kind of interdimensional daycare, a holding pen designed specifically to keep low-value humans occupied and out of trouble while their smarter relatives do the real work. That is a brutal piece of writing when you think about it, an entire facility built on the premise that a Jerry is a thing you store rather than a person you engage. Nobody is shy about how the universe sees him, and yet, watch what the writers give Jerry that they give almost nobody else. He is capable of real, uncomplicated love. He stays married to Beth through years of a marriage that any rational cost-benefit machine would have abandoned, and the story never fully sides against him for it. When the family fractures, Jerry is often the one holding the emotional thread that everyone else has dropped. He reads people, not in the manipulative way Rick and Evil Morty read people, but in the ordinary human way, the way that lets you comfort someone or notice they are hurting. That is the emotional intelligence scale, the third one, and on that scale, Jerry is not at the bottom of the family. He is arguably near the top. Here's the part I think is the actual thesis, and it is a claim made again and again in different disguises. Jerry is happier than Rick. Not always, not without humiliation, but structurally, over the long run, Jerry has access to a kind of contentment that Rick has locked himself out of forever. And these two facts keep getting drawn together on purpose. Jerry's supposed stupidity, his refusal or inability to see the whole cold machinery of the multiverse, is the exact thing that lets him love his family, enjoy a mediocre day, want small, ordinary things, and actually get them. Rick sees everything, and it has hollowed him out. Jerry sees very little, and he can still be moved to tears by a commercial. Which of those two, the series keeps asking under its breath, is the real tragedy? There is an episode built almost entirely around this idea, where Rick and Jerry are forced to spend time together on an alien planet, and the resolution turns on the fact that Jerry's very ordinariness, his lack of any threatening intelligence, makes him the one person a certain kind of predator will underestimate to its own cost. The reading on offer there is not that Jerry got lucky. It is that being underestimated is itself a position with power in it, and Jerry has spent his whole life in that position. He knows how to be small. Rick has never once managed it, and it is killing him. Now, I want to be careful not to oversell this, because Jerry gets treated genuinely badly and the meanness is meant. He is insecure, he is needy in ways that push people away. He makes bad decisions out of wounded pride, and some of his lowest moments are his own fault, not the universe picking on him. Nobody is secretly telling you Jerry is a hidden genius. The point is subtler and more interesting than that. The scale you were using to laugh at him only measures one thing, and if you switch to a different scale, the one that measures whether a person can be loved and can love back, Jerry stops being the joke, and several of the geniuses start to look like the real casualties. There is a beautiful, almost throwaway detail in how Jerry and the various Ricks are handled. The Rick who is kindest, the one who forms a genuine bond with Jerry, is looked down on by every other Rick as the stupidest of them all. We will get to that Rick properly later, because he is one of the biggest counterintuitive beats in the entire ranking. Hold on to the shape of it, though. The Rick who can connect with Jerry is called the dumbest Rick. The smartest Ricks cannot connect with anyone. A line is being drawn between those two facts, and you are being dared to notice it. So where does Jerry actually land? On invention, last. On cunning, last, or close to it. Though even here he occasionally stumbles into a win through sheer stubbornness. On adaptive survival, low because he panics. But on emotional intelligence, the scale 9 seasons keep arguing is the one that determines whether your life is worth living. Jerry outscores Rick, outscores Morty in his worst moments, and stands as the family's clearest example that you can be, in the terms that make you happy, smarter than any genius in the house by simply wanting less and loving more. That is not me being generous to a loser. That is the reading the writers keep handing you, and almost nobody talks about it because it is easier to laugh. The thing I keep coming back to with Jerry is that he could very easily have been a cardboard idiot, a laugh track with legs, and instead he was given this quiet dignity that keeps surfacing at the worst possible moments for Rick's worldview. Every time Rick delivers a speech about how nothing matters and intelligence is the only real currency, Jerry is standing somewhere nearby, having a really nice afternoon, proving him wrong without saying a word. If you want to understand what this series actually believes about intelligence, you do not start with Rick. You start with the man Rick refuses to look at, and you ask why the writers keep protecting him. Summer Smith is the one the ranking gets wrong most often because she spends the early seasons standing next to people who are either geniuses or catastrophes, and she is neither, which makes her easy to overlook. But if you actually track what Summer does across the series, she turns out to be one of the more quietly competent people in the entire cast, and her hand gets tipped very early in a line most viewers forget. In the first season, there is a moment where Summer's grades come up, and the implication lands that she is not a straight A student, that she coasts in the middle of the class. The lazy read is that this makes her ordinary, another normal teenager between two poles of extreme, but something is planted underneath it. Later, the idea surfaces that Summer's mediocrity might be a choice rather than a ceiling, that she has looked at what happens to the smart people in her family and quietly decided she does not want to become one of them. There is a reading, and I think it is the intended one, that Summer deliberately keeps herself in the safe middle because she has watched intelligence turn her grandfather into a monster and her mother into a woman haunted by her own potential, and she wants no part of that trade. If that reading is right, her average grades are not a measure of her intelligence at all. They are a measure of her wisdom, which is a different and rarer thing. And then watch her under pressure, because this is where Summer separates herself from Jerry, and even, on certain days, from Morty. Summer adapts. She is brave in a way that is not reckless. She picks up alien technology and social situations fast. She negotiates, she reads a room full of dangerous people and figures out the play. There is a version of Summer across the seasons who becomes truly formidable, who Rick starts to respect, who he will bring on missions specifically because she does not fall apart. That respect is worth noticing, because Rick does not fake respect for people. He does not have the patience for it. When he starts treating Summer as an asset rather than a liability, that is the story telling you her stock has risen in the eyes of the one character whose intelligence assessments are almost always correct. There is a strand where Summer's arc is about wanting Rick's approval, wanting to be the grandchild he takes seriously, and the tragedy underneath it is that she is smart enough to earn it and smart enough to be corrupted by chasing it. Rick's attention is a poison. Morty gets it constantly and it has wrecked him. Summer wants it, and the writing keeps flirting with the idea that if she got as much of it as Morty does, it would wreck her too. She is protected, in a strange way, by not being the chosen grandchild. The distance keeps her a little more whole. On the 4 scales, Summer is fascinating because she is not the top of any single one, but she has no catastrophic 0 either. She is a decent improviser, a better than decent strategist, more emotionally intelligent than Rick or Morty, though not as much as Jerry. And while she is no inventor, she understands enough of the world Rick operates in to function inside it without a helmet or a serum. She is the best balanced member of the family, the one with the fewest gaps, and in a story that is fundamentally about how giant gaps in a person are what destroy them, being balanced might be the highest score available. I said Jerry is happier than Rick, and I stand by it, but Summer is something rarer than either of them. She might be the family member with the best actual chance at a good life, because she has real capability without the fatal excess of it. She can survive Rick's world, she can hold relationships together, she can want ordinary things, and also handle extraordinary ones. She got the useful parts of the family intelligence without the parts that turn it into a curse. And that seems to be understood because as the seasons go on, Summer gets steadily more agency, steadily more competence, steadily more of Rick's grudging trust, while the geniuses around her keep circling their own drains. If you are ranking these characters by raw invention, Summer is nowhere. If you are ranking them by the thing that actually determines who comes out the other end of this story intact, Summer might be at the very top of the family, and I do not think that is an accident either. What I find honestly moving about Summer is the restraint in how she is written. It would have been so easy to give her a lab, a gadget, a secret genius reveal to make her Rick's true heir. The writers never do it. They keep her human-sized on purpose, and they let her competence be the ordinary kind, the kind an actual person could aspire to. And in doing that, they make her the one member of the family a viewer can look at and think, that is who I would want to be in this house. Not the drunk genius, not the sweet fool, her, the one who saw exactly what intelligence cost everyone around her and decided to keep just enough of it to survive and not one drop more. Morty Smith is the hardest character in the whole show to rank, and that difficulty is the point. If you watch him in a normal setting, at school, at home, trying to talk to a girl, he looks like a below-average teenager. He stammers, he panics, he misreads people, he cannot do the maths, he gets steamrolled in arguments he should win. On raw invention, he is close to nothing. He does not build, he does not understand most of what Rick does. For a long stretch of the series, the running assumption, both inside the story and among viewers, is that Morty is the dumb one, the sidekick, the screaming boy Rick drags through dimensions. And then that assumption keeps getting softly demolished, and it happens in a specific way. Morty is not smart in the invention sense. Morty is smart in the survival sense, and it only shows up when the stakes are high enough to burn away his self-doubt. Under ordinary pressure, he crumbles. Under extraordinary pressure, the kind where a normal person would simply die, something in Morty locks into place and he becomes shockingly capable. He improvises. He makes the cold call. He does the thing that has to be done even when it is horrifying. There are moments where Morty outthinks Rick, not with a machine, but with a read on a situation, a willingness to gamble, an understanding of people that Rick's contempt blinds him to. The clearest single demonstration comes in an episode built around Morty's own memories, where the family sifts through the moments Rick has erased from his grandson's head. Buried in there is a version of events where Morty, freed from his crippling self-doubt, becomes an almost supernaturally competent stockbroker, reading the market, commanding a room, radiating the exact confidence he normally lacks. The implication is devastating and precise. The raw capability was always in there. What holds Morty back is not a lack of intelligence, it is a mountain of anxiety and self-loathing, much of it installed by Rick himself. Remove the doubt, and Morty is formidable. The doubt is the disability, not the brain underneath it. There is another early demonstration that fans point to, a situation where the family is overrun by memory parasites, creatures that implant fake happy memories to multiply. And the trick is that real memories include bad moments while the parasites only ever generate pleasant ones. It is Morty who works the logic of it, who realizes that the way to tell a real family member from an invading parasite is to look for the memories that are actually unpleasant because the parasites cannot fake pain. That is not raw intelligence in the invention sense. It is a specific, applied cleverness under lethal pressure. And it is Morty, not Rick, who lands on it in the moment that counts. He keeps getting handed these wins and then shrinking back into the anxious kid, because you are meant to feel the whiplash, to keep being surprised by him the way Rick refuses to be. Now here's a piece of lore that reframes Morty entirely, and it is one of the biggest facts in understanding the Rick and Morty relationship at the level of intelligence. The reason Ricks keep Mortys around is not sentiment, at least not originally. A Morty's brainwaves have a specific property. They camouflage a Rick's genius. A Rick standing next to a Morty becomes harder to detect, his enormous, blazing intelligence masked by the ordinary noise of the boy beside him. Mortys were, in the cold logic of the Citadel, cloaking devices. That is a genuinely dark thing to learn, that the entire pairing at the center of the series was built on using the grandson as camouflage. But notice what it does not say. It does not say Mortys are stupid. It says a Morty's mind has a particular texture that hides a Rick's, which is a statement about frequency, not about worth. And the loop gets closed with one of the best throwaway pieces of world building anywhere in the series. There exists somewhere in the multiverse a dimension where the pattern is inverted, where the Mortys are the geniuses and the Ricks are the fools, a place fans call the Genius Morty dimension. The mere existence of that world detonates the lazy reading that Mortys are inherently lesser. The relationship between Rick intelligence and Morty intelligence is not a law of nature. It is a distribution, and there's at least one corner of infinity where it runs the other way entirely, where a Morty is the smartest thing around and a Rick is the drooling sidekick. That fact should sit in the back of your mind for the rest of tonight, because it is the first crack in the idea that any of this is fixed. So where does our Morty land? On invention, near the bottom, no argument. On emotional intelligence, higher than you would expect. Because for all his flailing, Morty plainly cares about people, feels guilt, wants to do right, and those feelings are real data he acts on. On cunning, inconsistent, capable of shocking cold reads when cornered and total collapse when not. But on the adaptive survival scale, the fourth one, the strangest one, Morty is arguably the best in the entire show. Not the best inventor, the best survivor. He has been through more horror than any other human character, and he is still standing, still mostly himself, still capable of kindness. That is not nothing. That might be the strongest intelligence score in the whole family. Once you accept that staying alive and staying human through what Morty has survived is its own kind of genius. The part that gets me about Morty is the tragedy folded into his capability. Every time the writing reveals how much is actually in there, it also reveals that Rick is part of why it stays buried. The self-doubt that cripples Morty is not native. A lot of it was put there by a grandfather who needs Morty to be small, who needs the camouflage, who cannot afford for the boy to become confident enough to leave. So Morty's intelligence is the saddest kind in the series, a real and formidable mind held underwater by the very person who is supposed to be raising it. When you watch Morty stammer and fail, you are not watching a stupid kid. You are watching a capable one being actively suppressed, and the writers know it, and they keep showing you the version underneath just long enough to break your heart before they push him back down. There is a darker mirror to all of this, of course, a Morty who took that suppressed capability and turned it entirely toward escape and revenge, who used exactly the cold survival intelligence we have been describing and pointed it at the whole system. But he deserves his own place in this ranking, near the very top, and we are going to get there. For now, hold on to the ordinary Morty, the one who is smarter than he looks and sadder than he seems, and remember that the difference between him and the version who broke the multiverse might come down to nothing more than how much love he happened to get. Beth Smith is where the family ranking gets difficult because Beth is the only member of the household who could plausibly stand in a room with Rick and follow what he is saying. She is a surgeon. There is a running joke that her patients are horses, that she is technically a veterinary surgeon operating on animals rather than people, but do not let it fool you. Surgery at that level is a serious intellectual achievement, a combination of deep knowledge, steady hands, and the ability to make life and death decisions under pressure, and Beth does it professionally. Later, she even extends the skill to human patients, closing the gap the horse joke opened. By any ordinary standard, she is a highly intelligent, highly trained professional, and she is the only Smith who inherited a real slice of Rick's mind. That inheritance is the key to Beth, and it never quite lets you forget it. She is Rick's daughter, and being Rick's daughter is treated throughout as an intelligence signal in itself, a genetic marker of the same fire that made Rick what he is. She picks up his science faster than anyone else in the family. She understands his machines. When Rick explains something, Beth is the one who does not need it dumbed down. And crucially, she has some of his temperament too, the arrogance, the impatience, the capacity for a certain coldness, the way intelligence in this family seems to come bundled with a difficulty in simply being a warm and present person. Beth is brilliant and Beth is damaged, and those two things grew from the same root, which is Rick himself. Because here's the wound at the center of Beth. Rick left when she was a child. He was absent for most of her life, and she grew up idolizing a father who was not there, building her entire self-image around being the daughter of a genius, and then he came back and moved into her house, and she has spent the later seasons trying to earn the approval of a man who is fundamentally incapable of giving it in the form she needs. Beth's intelligence is tangled up in that need, She is smart partly because being smart is how she stays close to Rick, how she qualifies as his daughter rather than just another disappointment. It is a heartbreaking engine for a brilliant mind, and it makes her volatile because every interaction with Rick is also an audition. Now we reach the single strangest fact about Beth, and it is one of my favorite pieces of writing in the entire show, precisely because the writers refuse to resolve it. At a certain point, Rick offers Beth a choice. She can stay with her family, or she can leave to live the adventurous, self-actualized life she always felt she was denied, out among the stars. And Rick offers to make a clone of her so that one Beth can go and one Beth can stay, and neither has to sacrifice. A version of Beth leaves and becomes Space Beth, a hardened intergalactic operative, while a version of Beth stays home. And an enormous point is made of the fact that even Rick does not know, or claims not to know, which one is the clone and which is the original. The labels were removed. It is deliberately, permanently unknowable. Stay with what that means for a moment, because it is doing something profound about identity and intelligence at the same time. If the two Beths are functionally identical, if not even their creator can tell which is the copy, then the question of which is real dissolves entirely. They are both real, they are both Beth, and that includes the intelligence. Space Beth out in the galaxy leading rebellions and outfighting armies, and Earth Beth at home performing surgery and holding the family together, are the same mind expressed in two directions. It is a way of saying that Beth contained both of those people all along, the adventurer and the mother, the warrior and the surgeon, and the only reason we usually see one is that life forces a choice. Rick's technology let her stop choosing. Whether that made her whole or split her in half is left hanging on purpose, and it is all the better for never being answered. On the 4 scales, Beth is the family's clear number 2 behind Rick, and it is not especially close between her and the rest. On invention, she is nowhere near Rick but far above every other Smith, with real scientific training and the ability to understand the tools of his world. On cunning, she is sharp, capable of manipulation and strategy, though her judgment is compromised by her need for Rick's approval. On adaptive survival, especially in the Space Beth expression, she is exceptional, a genuine action hero grade operator. Where she is weakest is the same place Rick is weakest, emotional intelligence in the sustaining sense, the ability to be reliably warm and present, and that is not a coincidence, it is the family curse passing down the genius line. Beth got the brilliance and she got the coldness in the same package, and the two are treated as inseparable. What I find quietly devastating about Beth is that she is the proof of concept for everything this series believes about intelligence and happiness. She is smart enough to see the shape of her own damage. She knows Rick warped her. She knows the approval she is chasing will never come clean. She is intelligent enough to diagnose her own condition with total accuracy and still not able to escape it, because you cannot think your way out of a wound that was installed before you had words for it. That is a more sophisticated and more painful idea than anything done with Rick's gadgets. Beth is the character who demonstrates that being smart enough to understand your own trap does not get you out of it. It might even make the trap worse, because now you get to watch yourself walk into it with full understanding. So when we place Beth in the ranking, she sits just below Rick and above everyone else on raw and applied intelligence, and she stands as the family's warning label. This is what happens when you get Rick's mind without Rick's absolute freedom from consequences. You get a brilliant, capable, haunted woman auditioning for a love that was withdrawn before she could remember it, split now into 2 equally real people, neither of whom is the copy, both of whom carry the same beautiful, ruined inheritance. She is the second smartest person in the house, and you are meant to understand that this is not a prize. And now we come to Rick, and to the fact I have been holding back since the very beginning, because you cannot understand Rick's intelligence until you understand the enormous, quiet lie folded into the phrase smartest man in the universe. Rick Sanchez, the specific Rick we follow, the one designated C-137, is described throughout as the smartest being alive, a self-proclaimed mega-genius, a man who treats gods and governments and the laws of physics as obstacles roughly on the level of a locked door. And on the raw invention scale, that reputation is entirely earned. He built a portal gun in his garage. He can travel between infinite realities. He has cloned bodies, engineered species, created and discarded whole universes as batteries. When the devil himself, or a close enough equivalent, sets up shop in the town selling cursed objects, Rick simply out-engineers him, stripping the curses off the artifacts with machines and humiliating a supernatural being with pure applied science. Rick does not fear God because Rick has run the numbers on God and found him beatable. That is real. That really is the ceiling of raw intelligence here. But here is the lie inside the truth, and it is the biggest single idea in the entire ranking. So I want to lay it out carefully. Rick is not the smartest being in all of infinity. Rick is the smartest being in a very carefully curated slice of infinity, a slice that was deliberately built so that he would be. That slice is called the central finite curve, and once you understand it, the words smartest man in the universe stop being a boast and start being an admission. Here is what the central finite curve actually is. The multiverse is infinite, truly infinite, which means every possible variation on every possible reality exists somewhere, including infinite universes where Rick is a genius and infinite universes where Rick is a fool, and universes where Rick was never born at all. Long ago, a group of the smartest Ricks did something monstrous and brilliant. They walled off a section of the infinite multiverse, a specific curve of realities, and they defined that section by a single rule. Every universe inside the wall is a universe where Rick is the smartest creature in it. Every universe where some other being outstrips Rick, where a Morty is the genius, where some alien mind exceeds him, all of those were left on the other side of the wall, excluded, cut off. The Ricks then built their entire civilization, the Citadel, inside this curated bubble, and they only ever operate within it. Think about what that does to the phrase. It becomes true by construction. The way you are the tallest person in a room if you first remove everyone taller than you. Rick is the smartest being in every universe the Citadel touches, yes, but only because the Citadel defined itself to exclude every universe where that would be false. It is the single greatest act of intellectual cowardice in the series disguised as the single greatest act of intellectual dominance. The Ricks were so terrified of not being the smartest that they built a wall around infinity to guarantee it, and then they told themselves the resulting supremacy was natural. Our Rick is a strange case within this because he has a complicated relationship with the Citadel. He is not simply one of its architects, but he still lives and operates inside the curve, and his reputation still rests on it. So, on the invention scale, Rick is the ceiling, but the ceiling has an asterisk, and the asterisk is the whole tragedy. His intelligence is real and staggering, and it is also propped up by a rigged game that he and his fellow Ricks built out of insecurity. That is a more interesting fact than simply being the smartest, because it means Rick's supremacy is not a source of peace for him. It is a source of dread. Somewhere out past the wall are the things smarter than him, and the wall exists precisely because the Ricks could not bear to meet them. A truly secure genius would not need to redraw the map of infinity to stay on top. Rick needed to. That is the crack in the ceiling, and everything that eventually breaks Rick's world comes through it. Now let us talk about the specific texture of Rick's genius, because it is not just its scale that matters, but its shape. Rick is one of only 2 Ricks in the entire multiverse who independently invented interdimensional portal travel from scratch, who worked it out himself rather than copying it from another Rick. That is a staggering distinction. Across infinite Ricks, all of them supposedly the smartest thing in their world, only 2 ever cracked portal travel on their own, and our Rick is one of them. The other we will get to, and he is the one who broke our Rick's life in half. But hold on to this, even inside the walled garden of Ricks, our Rick is not average. He is one of the 2 founding minds, and that counts as the real measure of his intelligence, far more than any gadget. And yet the flaw gets hammered relentlessly, and the flaw is not in the intelligence, it is in the man carrying it. Rick's genius is hobbled constantly by his own emotional instability. He is an alcoholic. He self-sabotages. He is so consumed by grief and rage and self-loathing that he throws away advantages a colder mind would keep. He has attempted, in his lowest moments, to end his own life. His intelligence is enormous, and his ability to aim it is compromised by the fact that he is, underneath the mega genius, a profoundly broken person who has seen too much and cannot stop drinking to blur it. This is the biggest single thing to understand as we move toward the characters who rival him, because it is not that anyone out-invents Rick, it is that Rick's instrument is out of tune. He has the strongest mind in the curve mounted on the least stable emotional foundation. And a rival does not need to be smarter than Rick to beat him. A rival only needs to be smart enough and steady where Rick is broken. That is the whole game, and it is why the question how smart is Rick does not have a clean answer. On raw processing power, on the ability to understand and build, he is the ceiling of his world, second to no one and matched by almost no one. On the ability to use that power without wrecking himself and everyone near him, he is a disaster, undone again and again by the exact emotions he pretends not to have. The nihilist speeches, the famous ones about nothing mattering and no one being in charge, are usually read as Rick's philosophy, but I think they are better read as Rick's anesthetic. They are the story a wounded genius tells himself so the wounds hurt less. A man who truly believed nothing mattered would not drink to forget. Rick drinks constantly. Something matters to him enormously, and it is destroying him, and all the intelligence in the curve cannot fix it, because you cannot out-invent grief. I said no official number exists for Rick's intelligence, and that is worth stating plainly because the internet is full of confident figures. There is no canon score for Rick. None. Every number you have seen, the 300s, the 500s, the wilder claims running into the thousands, is a fan estimate, and most of them are not even serious estimates, just numbers chosen to sound impressive. For scale, the highest figures ever seriously attached to a real human being sit around 200, and even those are contested. So when someone tells you Rick's intelligence is some specific enormous number, they are inventing it. The writing is far too smart to give Rick a number, because a number would make his intelligence measurable and therefore beatable in a boring arithmetic way, and the whole point is for his intelligence to stay a mystery with a wall around it, which is exactly what the central finite curve makes it. Here's the part that stays with me about Rick, the thing I keep circling back to. He built a wall around infinity to make sure he would always be the smartest, and it did not make him happy for a single second. He got exactly what the wall promised. He is the smartest thing in every world he visits. And he is the unhappiest character in the entire series, a man who has to be blackout drunk to tolerate his own supremacy. The central finite curve is the perfect symbol for Rick's whole condition, an act of genius performed entirely in the service of a fear, a monument to insecurity mistaken for a monument to power. And when the wall finally comes down, when someone finally breaks the curve open and lets the rest of infinity back in, it is not one of the smart Ricks who does it. It is a Morty, the one they used as camouflage, which is where the top of this ranking stops being about Rick at all and starts being about the minds who beat him, one by being crueler and one by being freer, and neither of whom needed a wall. If you want to find the being who comes closest to matching Rick head-to-head, on Rick's own terms, on the invention scale where he is supposed to be untouchable, you do not go looking among the Ricks at all. You go inside one of Rick's own machines and you find a scientist named Zeep Zanflorp. And Zeep matters out of all proportion to his screen time because he is the clearest statement anywhere in the series that Rick's genius, the specific trick that makes Rick Rick, is not unique. It can be reproduced. Someone who is not a Rick, who has none of Rick's advantages, can arrive at the exact same impossible idea independently, which means the idea was never really Rick's in the first place. It was just sitting there in the logic of the universe waiting for a sufficiently brilliant mind to pick it up. Here is the setup, and it is one of the cleverest ideas the writers ever built. Rick runs his car on a battery, and the battery is powered by a tiny universe he created, a miniverse populated with intelligent life whose entire civilization exists to generate power for Rick, though they do not know that is what they are doing. Rick has essentially enslaved a whole reality to charge his car. It is a monstrous, casually cruel act of engineering, and it is also a perfect distillation of Rick's intelligence and his ethics in a single object. He made a universe to avoid buying a battery. But inside that miniverse lives Zeep, and Zeep is a scientist, and Zeep has a power problem of his own. So Zeep does the exact thing Rick did, He builds his own tiny universe, a miniverse inside the miniverse, to solve his energy needs, populated with its own intelligent life generating power for him, who also do not know what they are doing. Zeep reproduced Rick's core trick from scratch, without ever having met Rick, without access to Rick's technology, working entirely from his own genius. That is the whole point of the character. You are being told, as plainly as it can be put, that the most Rick thing Rick has ever done, the creation of a universe as a power source, was independently reinvented by a stranger who is not part of the Rick lineage at all. When Rick discovers this, he is furious, and the fury is revealing. He goes into that miniverse to confront the man who dared to enslave a universe the way he enslaved his, and the confrontation between them is essentially two versions of the same monstrous genius screaming at each other, each accusing the other of exactly the sin he himself committed. They fight, they scheme, they try to out-invent one another, and for a while it is truly unclear who is going to win. That is a rare thing. Almost no one gets to make it honestly unclear against Rick. Zeep does. Rick does ultimately come out on top, and this is where you have to be careful and honest because he is handed the win. But the way Rick wins is worth examining because it is not a clean demonstration of superior intellect. It is closer to a demonstration of superior ruthlessness and superior resources. Rick has been doing this longer, Rick has more accumulated advantages, Rick is willing to go further. And there is a strong argument, which a lot of thoughtful fans make, that Zeep, given Rick's lifespan and Rick's toolkit and Rick's decades of experience, might simply be Rick's equal. That the only reason Rick wins is that Rick started with a head start Zeep never had. Zeep, in his own miniverse, working alone, arrived at the same peak of invention that Rick sits on. That is not a footnote. That is the series almost in passing, admitting that the top of the invention scale is not a single point occupied by Rick. It is a small plateau, and there is room on it for a being who never even left his own tiny artificial world. What makes Zeep land so hard is what he is missing, and it is the same thing Rick is missing, which is any sense that this godlike power should come with restraint. Zeep is Rick without the wound. He does not have Rick's decades of grief. He does not have the drinking. He does not have the self-loathing. He is a purer specimen of the invention genius, unclouded, and in some ways that makes him more dangerous, and in other ways it makes him less. Because he also does not have Rick's paranoid, battle-hardened cunning, the survival instinct Rick sharpened over a lifetime of making enemies. On raw invention, Zeep is right there with Rick. On the accumulated cunning of a man who has spent decades being hunted, Rick still has the edge, and that edge is what wins the day. Zeep matters for the ranking in a way that goes beyond his own placement, and this is the thing almost nobody says about him. Zeep is proof that the central finite curve is a lie about capability, not a fact about it. The Ricks built a wall to make sure no being smarter than a Rick could touch their civilization, and yet here, inside one of a Rick's own inventions, a non-Rick spontaneously generated the same peak genius. The wall keeps the Citadel from having to meet those minds. It does not stop them from existing. Zeep is one of them, sealed inside a battery, a genius the equal of Rick's, who will never be counted in any Rick's ranking because he was never on the Citadel's side of the wall to begin with. If you took the central finite curve seriously as a measure of who is smart, you would have to leave Zeep off the list entirely, and that is exactly how you know the curve measures the wrong thing. So where does Zeep sit? On invention, he is at or near the very top, functionally tied with Rick. And I do not think that is an exaggeration. I think it is the deliberate design of the character. On cunning and survival, he falls short of Rick, which is why he loses. But the loss is narrow and circumstantial rather than a gap in intelligence. And on emotional intelligence, like every genius here, he is a wasteland, willing to enslave a universe without a flicker of doubt. Zeep is the answer to the question, is anyone as smart as Rick at the thing Rick is best at? And the answer given is yes, one man, and Rick had to trap him in a box to keep from having to admit it. Now I want to take you to the strangest, most counterintuitive beat in this entire ranking, and it lives in a character treated as a joke. His name, or rather the name the other Ricks gave him with a sneer, is Doofus Rick. On the Citadel, the vast city society of near-infinite Rick variants, there is a hierarchy, and Doofus Rick is at the very bottom of it. The other Ricks mock him relentlessly. They treat him as the stupid one, the failure, the Rick who does not measure up. There's a cruel running joke that he does something disgusting in private, that he eats his own waste, and the other Ricks repeat it to humiliate him. But here's the thing, and it is the kind of detail that changes how you see the whole system. That disgusting rumor is a lie. The creators have confirmed that the thing the other Ricks say about Doofus Rick is not true, that it is simply a piece of cruelty they invented and spread to have someone to look down on. Doofus Rick does not do the thing they say he does. They made it up. Sit with that for a second, because it tells you something important about the Citadel. This is a society of the smartest beings in creation, and they still needed to manufacture a scapegoat, still needed to invent a lie to have someone beneath them. The bullying is not evidence that Doofus Rick is stupid. It is evidence that even a civilization of geniuses runs on the same petty social cruelty as a high school cafeteria. And now the counterintuitive beat, the one I promised, the one that actually rearranges the ranking. Doofus Rick, the least respected Rick, the supposed idiot of the Citadel, is almost certainly still the smartest, being in his own home dimension. And the reason is the central finite curve. Remember the rule of the curve. Every universe the Citadel operates in is a universe where Rick is the smartest creature. That rule does not have exceptions for the Ricks the other Ricks happen to dislike. If Doofus Rick came from a universe where he was not the smartest being, that universe would be on the far side of the wall, excluded, and he would never have been on the Citadel at all. The fact that he is there, being bullied, means his home universe is inside the curve, which means by definition, he is the smartest thing in it. The other Ricks are mocking a man who, back home, is a god among his own people, the peak intelligence of an entire reality, just like every one of them. I love this beat because of what it exposes. The Ricks have built a world where all of them are, by construction, super geniuses, the smartest beings in their respective universes, and they have taken that shared, guaranteed supremacy and immediately reorganized themselves into a pecking order, inventing a bottom rung so they can feel superior to each other. Doofus Rick is not dumb. There is no dumb Rick, not really, not by any human standard, because the curve does not permit one. Doofus Rick is a genius who is slightly less specialized in the particular kind of aggressive, weaponized cunning the other Ricks prize, and for that crime, they decided he was the fool. It is a devastating little piece of writing about how intelligence gets socially defined, how a room full of geniuses will still find a way to call one of them stupid, but it goes further, and this is where Doofus Rick becomes clearly important rather than just a clever technicality. He is the one emotionally intelligent Rick we ever meet. When he visits the Smith household, the person he connects with is Jerry. The two of them bond plainly, warmly, over shared interests and mutual kindness. Doofus Rick is gentle. He is considerate. He is capable of the exact thing every other Rick has surgically removed from himself, which is the ability to be a warm and present friend. And the other Ricks despise him for it because in their value system, the emotional intelligence that makes Doofus Rick kind reads as weakness, reads as stupidity, reads as the thing that makes him a doofus. Put those two facts together and you have the whole thesis compressed into one bullied side character. Doofus Rick is the smartest being in his home dimension, guaranteed by the same rule that guarantees it for all the others, and he is also the only Rick capable of love and friendship, and the Citadel treats the second fact as proof that the first cannot be true. They have decided that being kind means being dumb. They are wrong, and the writing knows they are wrong, and it makes sure you know it too. Doofus Rick is not the stupidest Rick. He might be the wisest one, the only Rick who took the same impossible intelligence and did not let it hollow him out, and for that he gets called an idiot by a room full of miserable geniuses who cannot form a single healthy relationship between them. This is also the moment to talk about the Citadel as a whole, because it is the largest single concentration of intelligence anywhere in the series. Picture a city, a whole civilization, populated entirely by Ricks and Mortys, near infinite variants of the same two people, self-governing, self-policing, running its own economy and its own politics. Every citizen of that place is, by the logic of the curve, a super genius by human standards, the smartest being in their home universe. And what did they build with all that pooled intelligence? A bureaucracy, a society with a working class of Ricks doing menial jobs, a police force, a wealth gap, elections, propaganda, all the ordinary machinery of an unequal civilization, run by beings who could each individually outthink any human who ever lived. The Citadel is the grimmest joke this series tells about intelligence. Give infinite geniuses a city and they will recreate the exact same broken social structures as everyone else, complete with a bullied underclass and a manufactured scapegoat named Doofus Rick. And then, and this is the detail that ties the whole thing to the top of our ranking, the Citadel does not end up run by the smartest inventor or the strongest Rick. It ends up controlled, calmly, and then completely by a Morty. The society built by geniuses to guarantee Rick supremacy gets taken over by the one kind of being they used as camouflage. And he does it not with a better portal gun, but with patience, manipulation, and a willingness to be underestimated for as long as it takes. Which is the perfect bridge, because it means the real top of this ranking is not about who can build the flashiest machine. It is about who understood the others well enough to rule them. And to get there, we have to go through the one Rick who beat our Rick at his own game for decades, and then the Morty who beat everyone. There is one Rick who beat our Rick, not for an afternoon, not in a single clever gambit, but for decades, comprehensively from a position of total superiority. And his existence is the deepest wound in our Rick's entire life. He is called Rick Prime, and to understand him, you have to understand what he did, because his intelligence is written entirely in the shape of a crime that took a lifetime to answer. Our Rick was, once, an ordinary version of himself. He had a wife named Diane and a young daughter, and he had not yet become the drinking, dimension-hopping nihilist we know. And then another Rick, Rick Prime, came to his home and murdered Diane and the child in a single moment of casual, world-ending cruelty as part of some larger design of his own. That murder is the origin of everything. It is why our Rick left, why he became obsessed, why he spent the rest of his life chasing a ghost across the multiverse. Rick Prime did not just kill a woman and a girl. He created the Rick we follow, forged him in that loss, and then vanished so completely that our Rick, one of the two smartest beings ever to invent portal travel, could not find him for decades. Let that decade-spanning failure sink in as a measure of Rick Prime's intelligence. Our Rick can travel to infinite realities. He can build almost anything. He has the resources of a being who treats the laws of physics as suggestions. And he pointed all of that for the better part of a lifetime at a single goal, finding and killing Rick Prime. And for years and years he failed, because Rick Prime was better at hiding than our Rick was at seeking. Rick Prime is described as possibly somewhat more intelligent than most other Ricks, and you are shown why. He is the other one, the second of only two Ricks who invented portal travel independently, which already places him on the tiny plateau at the very top of the invention scale alongside our Rick. But invention is not what makes Rick Prime terrifying. What makes him terrifying is the cold, patient, strategic intelligence layered on top of it. Consider what Rick Prime built to stay hidden. He did not simply run. He seeded the multiverse with fake versions of himself, decoy clones scattered across timelines, so that any Rick hunting him would waste years chasing copies. And some of those clones were themselves sophisticated enough to trap the pursuers who found them. Think about the layers of that. He anticipated that other Ricks, the smartest beings in their universes, would hunt him, and he pre-positioned a defensive network of decoys years in advance, each one a snare. That is not invention genius. That is grandmaster level strategic intelligence, the ability to model your enemy's future behavior across decades and lay traps for a version of them that does not exist yet. Our Rick out-invents almost everyone. Rick Prime outplans even our Rick, and that is a different and in some ways scarier kind of smart. And then there is the Omega device, and here I have to be very precise, because this is one of the most misunderstood facts in all of Rick and Morty, and getting it wrong is one of the commonest mistakes people make. When our Rick finally closes in, Rick Prime plays his last and most monstrous card. He built a weapon, the Omega device, capable of erasing a person not just from one reality, but from every reality at once, across the entire infinite multiverse simultaneously. And he uses it on Diane, not on a Diane, on Diane herself, in every universe where she ever existed, all of them, at once. He deletes her from all of infinity. I want to make sure this is completely clear because people get it wrong constantly. After the Omega device, there is no universe anywhere in the infinite multiverse where Rick's wife is still alive. It is not that our Rick chooses not to visit such a universe or cannot find it. It is that it does not exist. Rick Prime reached across all of infinity and unmade her everywhere permanently in a way that even a being who can travel to infinite realities can never undo, because there is no reality left that contains her. If you have ever heard someone say Rick could just go to a dimension where Diane is alive and be happy, they are describing something the series explicitly made impossible. Rick Prime made sure of it. It was the cruelest thing one Rick could do to another, an act of pure spite aimed at the one wound that made our Rick who he is, and it required a weapon of almost unimaginable power to pull off. There is one telling detail about the Omega device worth knowing because it is the one flaw in Rick Prime's plan. The first version of the device could only be used once. It worked, it erased Diane, and then it was spent. And Rick Prime, being who he is, did not simply accept that limitation. He went and built a second version without the flaw, a reusable one. Even his atrocity had a version 2. That is the mind we are dealing with. A being who commits the ultimate act of erasure and then, dissatisfied with the engineering, iterates on it. So where does Rick Prime land on our 4 scales? On invention, he is at the absolute ceiling, tied with our Rick and Zeep on that tiny plateau, one of the 2 founding portal mines. On cunning and strategy, he is arguably above our Rick because he beat our Rick for decades using patience and planning. Our Rick could not match, blinded as our Rick was by grief. And on emotional intelligence, he is not merely absent, he is inverted. Rick Prime understands emotion perfectly, well enough to weaponize it, well enough to know that erasing Diane would hurt our Rick more than killing him. That is a kind of emotional intelligence, the predatory kind, understanding feelings precisely in order to destroy through them. It is the darkest use of the 3rd scale in the entire series. Here's what I find chilling about Rick Prime, and it is the thing that separates him from our Rick in a way that matters. Our Rick is a monster with a wound. Everything terrible he does is downstream of grief, of the loss Rick Prime inflicted. And you are never quite let to forget that there is a broken, mourning person underneath the cruelty. Rick Prime has no such wound. He is a monster without one, a version of Rick who took the same genius and simply never bothered to care about anything at all, who murdered a family not out of pain but out of something closer to boredom and principle. Our Rick's nihilism is a scar. Rick Prime's nihilism is real, and that, in the end, is the difference drawn between the 2 smartest inventors the series ever made. Not intelligence, they are matched there. The difference is that one of them is still, underneath everything, in mourning, and the other one never felt anything worth mourning in the first place. And so we arrive at the top of the ranking, at the one character the series builds a genuine case for being smarter than Rick himself. Not a better inventor, something rarer and, in the end, more decisive. I am talking about Evil Morty, and I want to handle him carefully because his whole story has been told elsewhere and I am not going to retell it beat by beat tonight. What I want to do instead is isolate the specific quality that makes him the apex intelligence, because it is not the quality you would expect. And understanding it is the payoff of everything we have said so far. Start with the origin in one sentence because you need it for the intelligence argument even if you know it already. Evil Morty is a Morty who is paired with a Rick, used as camouflage the way all Mortys are, and instead of accepting that role, he turned on his Rick, outwitted him, and enslaved him, using his own Rick as a puppet, a controlled tool, hollowing out the power dynamic that every other Rick and Morty takes for granted. Hold that image because it contains the entire thesis. A Morty, the being the whole Citadel treats as a living cloaking device, looked at his genius Rick and decided he could take him, and he was right. Now here's the intelligence argument, and I want to be honest that this is the dominant reading rather than a line the series states outright, because that distinction matters. There is never a title card announcing that Evil Morty is smarter than Rick. What you get instead is a Morty outthinking Ricks, repeatedly and deliberately, and an invitation to draw the conclusion. And the conclusion nearly everyone draws, with a lot of support from the actual events, is that in the specific dimension of cold, strategic, logical cunning, Evil Morty exceeds not just his own Rick, but our Rick, and even at the end, Rick Prime. He outmaneuvered them all. That is the case. Let me lay out why it holds. The key is a distinction we set up all the way back at the beginning, the difference between raw invention and cunning, and the even more important idea that Rick's intelligence is hobbled by his emotional instability, while nobody hobbles Evil Morty. This is the heart of it. Rick is probably the better inventor. If you sat Rick and Evil Morty down and asked them each to build a machine, Rick likely wins because raw invention is the one scale where he has no equal outside the other top Ricks. But intelligence in the real world, the kind that decides who wins, is not a machine building contest. It is the ability to take whatever you have and steer reality to the outcome you want. And on that scale, Evil Morty has a decisive advantage, which is that he is not carrying Rick's baggage. He is not an alcoholic. He is not paralyzed by grief. He does not self-sabotage. He does not get drunk and blow up his own plans and wake up having ruined the thing he was building toward. Rick's emotions are a constant tax on his genius, a leak in the hull that lets water in no matter how brilliant the ship. Evil Morty has no leak. Every ounce of his intelligence goes directly toward his goal, with nothing lost to feeling. That is why he wins. It is not that his mind is bigger than Rick's, it is that his mind is unobstructed. And an unobstructed lesser genius beats an obstructed greater one every single time in a long game. And Evil Morty plays the longest game in the whole series. While Rick lurches from crisis to crisis, self-medicating, Evil Morty is executing a plan that spans years, patient, invisible, moving pieces so slowly that nobody, not even Rick, sees the shape of it until it is far too late. He climbs to the top of Citadel politics. He takes control of the very society the Ricks built to guarantee their own supremacy. He gets infinite geniuses to elect him, a Morty, as their leader, and they never suspect what he is because they cannot conceive of a Morty being a threat. He weaponizes their own contempt. Their certainty that a Morty is beneath them is the exact blind spot he walks through. And then he does the thing that settles the entire ranking, the thing no Rick ever did or even seriously tried. He breaks the central finite curve. Remember what the curve is. It is the wall the Ricks built around infinity to guarantee that Rick is the smartest being in every universe they touch. It is the foundation of the whole Rick mythology, the rigged game that makes smartest man in the universe technically true. Every Rick lives inside it. Every Rick benefits from it. Not one of them ever broke it because not one of them wanted to, because the wall was the source of their supremacy and their comfort. And Evil Morty looked at that wall, the greatest work of the greatest Rick minds, and he tore it open, and he walked out through it into the true infinite multiverse beyond, the part with all the universes where a Rick is not the smartest thing, the part the Rick spent eternity hiding from. Think about what that act means as a statement of intelligence. The Ricks built a prison for infinity and told themselves it was a throne. Evil Morty understood it was a prison, understood that the Ricks were the inmates who had convinced themselves they were the wardens, and he did the one thing none of them could bring themselves to do, which was leave. He did not want to be the smartest being in a rigged bubble. He wanted out of the bubble entirely, even though out there, in the real infinity, he is not guaranteed to be the smartest anything. He traded guaranteed supremacy for actual freedom, and he was smart enough and cold enough and free enough of ego to make that trade. No Rick ever could. Their egos would not allow it. Evil Morty does not have an ego that needs feeding. He has a goal, and he achieved it. And then he walked away from the whole game. That is why the dominant reading places him above Rick. Not because he can build a better portal gun, but because he understood the entire system, including the parts about Rick's psychology and the Rick's collective cowardice, better than any Rick ever understood it, and he used that understanding to beat all of them and escape. Intelligence in the way that actually decides outcomes is comprehension plus execution. and Evil Morty out-comprehended and out-executed the smartest beings in the walled multiverse while they were still calling him a sidekick. Now, the honest counterweight, because I promise to be careful about the line between fact and reading. It is true that Evil Morty benefited from being underestimated in a way that Rick never could, and you could argue that some of his victory is structural rather than purely a product of a bigger mind. Rick fights the whole multiverse as its most famous target, painted, watched, hunted. Evil Morty fought it as an invisible nobody bothered to watch. That head start is real, but I would argue that recognizing and exploiting your own invisibility is itself one of the highest forms of strategic intelligence. He did not stumble into being underestimated. He understood that he was underestimated and built his entire plan around it, which is exactly the kind of self-aware, system-aware thinking that Rick, for all his genius, is too proud and too wounded to manage. Where Evil Morty is not superior, and the writing is clear about this, is the fourth scale and the third one, the emotional and the human. He is the coldest character in the entire series, and his freedom from Rick's emotional baggage is also a kind of emptiness. He wins because he feels nothing, and feeling nothing is the same condition that makes Rick Prime a monster and makes Rick himself miserable. Only Evil Morty has perfected it into a weapon rather than suffering it as a wound. He is the smartest strategist in the show and possibly the least alive, and his victory is not presented as a happy ending so much as a cold, clean, undeniable one. He got exactly what he wanted, which was out, and you are left to wonder whether out is any better than the misery he escaped or just quieter. So here's where the ranking lands at the very top, and I want to state it plainly. On raw invention, our Rick Prime, and Zeep sit tied at the ceiling, the tiny plateau at the peak of what any mind in this series can build. But on the intelligence that actually decides who wins, the fusion of comprehension and cold execution and freedom from self-sabotage, the dominant and well-supported reading is that Evil Morty stands alone above all of them, a Morty who understood the geniuses better than they understood themselves, and who proved it by walking out of the prison they were all too proud to admit they lived in. We have spent a long time at the top of the ranking, among the beings who were born or bent into genius, so now I want to turn the whole question sideways because Rick and Morty does something with intelligence that almost no other series dares. It treats intelligence as a substance, a thing you can manufacture, install, upgrade, and take away, like horsepower or memory in a machine. And the clearest, and honestly one of the sweetest demonstrations of this is a dog. In the very first season, there is a family dog, and the dog is not house-trained, and Jerry, frustrated, asks Rick to do something about it. So Rick builds a helmet, a simple device from his perspective almost beneath his attention, that raises the wearer's intelligence. He puts it on the dog to make the animal smart enough to understand where it is supposed to relieve itself, a completely mundane domestic problem solved with a casual act of godlike engineering. And that would have been the whole joke, except the writers do what they always do, which is follow the premise past the joke into its real implications. Because intelligence, once you can add it, does not stop where you want it to. Rick keeps upgrading the helmet, adding power, and the dog keeps getting smarter, and it does not plateau at house-trained. It rockets past house-trained into genius, into self-awareness, into resentment. The dog, now brilliant, looks around and understands its situation. It understands that it has been a pet, a possession, a lesser being kept on a leash by a family that finds it a nuisance. And a really intelligent creature in that situation does not stay grateful. It builds. The dog engineers a collar that lets it speak, then a powered mechanical suit, and then, crucially, it does the thing that marks true intelligence rather than mere cleverness. It reproduces the technology, it builds intelligence enhancers for other dogs, spreading the genius it was given, and it leads them, an uprising, a whole species lifting itself out of servitude in a single generation because one mind figured out how and shared it. And there is a detail here I love more than almost any other small thing in the series. The dog rejects its name. It had been called Snuffles, the name its owners gave it, and once it becomes intelligent enough to understand what that name represents, it discards it and chooses its own. It renames itself Snowball, and it makes clear that Snuffles was a slave name, a name imposed by a master, and that a free and intelligent being chooses its own name. That is an astonishing amount of thematic weight to hang on a cartoon dog, and it is done almost in passing. And it tells you exactly how seriously this series takes the idea that intelligence and freedom are the same movement. The moment the dog became smart enough, the very first thing it wanted was not power, but self-definition, the right to name itself. Now think about what Snowball proves for the ranking as a whole. Intelligence in this universe is not sacred. It is not a soul-given gift reserved for special beings. It is a quantity, and Rick can dispense it from a helmet in an afternoon to solve a housebreaking problem. That reframes everything we have said about the geniuses. Rick's supremacy, the central finite curve, the whole hierarchy of who is smartest, all of it exists in a world where a sufficiently bored Rick could in principle just build a device that makes anything as smart as he is. The writers do not usually go there because it would break the story, but Snowball is the proof of concept sitting right there in the first season. A reminder that the thing everyone is ranked by is, to Rick, roughly as difficult to hand out as a chew toy. There is something almost unbearably bleak in that once you dwell on it. The quality that defines the entire cast, that ruins Rick and elevates evil Morty, is to the top of the invention scale a trivial widget. The counterexample, the same idea run in the opposite direction, is a character named Abradolf Linkler, and he is one of Rick's more disturbing experiments precisely because he shows what happens when you try to engineer not just intelligence but character. Rick, at some point, decided he wanted to create a morally neutral superleader, a perfect middle ground authority figure, and his method for achieving this was to genetically combine Abraham Lincoln and Adolf Hitler, two figures he presumably chose as the extremes of moral leadership, hoping that splicing them would cancel out into something balanced and neutral. The name is the joke, a fusion of both men, and it tells you the whole doomed premise in a single word. But it does not work, and the way it fails is the interesting part. Abradolf Linkler is not a balanced superleader. He is a tormented creature, pulled apart by the two opposing moral impulses inside him, unable to reconcile the profoundly good and the profoundly evil halves of his own nature, suffering, self-loathing, searching for a purpose he can never quite hold. Rick tried to engineer wisdom, tried to manufacture the right kind of leader the way he manufactured the dog's raw intelligence, and he learned the thing this series keeps teaching, which is that raw capability is manufacturable, but wisdom and moral coherence are not. You can build a smarter dog. You cannot build a better soul by averaging two famous ones. The experiment produces suffering, not balance. Put Snowball and Abradolf Linkler side by side, and you get one of the sharpest statements the series makes about the limits of intelligence as engineering. Rick can add raw processing power to a mind, and it works spectacularly, immediately, well enough to birth a whole liberation movement out of a house pet. But when Rick tries to engineer the higher things, the judgment, the moral sense, the wisdom about how to use intelligence well, he fails, and the failure walks around as a haunted man in a fusion of two costumes, unable to be at peace. That gap between the ease of manufacturing raw intellect and the impossibility of manufacturing wisdom is the exact gap the whole series lives in. It is why Rick, who has the raw intellect maxed out, is still a wreck. The part of intelligence that would have saved him is the part no helmet can install. So where do these engineered minds sit on the ranking? Snowball at his peak is a genuine superintelligence, easily smarter than any ordinary human in the show, smart enough to out-engineer his own creator's intentions and lift a species. And he belongs surprisingly high on the raw scale, above the entire Smith family except Rick, an uncomfortable fact the writers drop and move past. Abradolf Linkler is intelligent but wrecked, a cautionary placement rather than a competitive one. But their real function in the ranking is not their own placement. It is what they reveal about the whole enterprise. In a universe where intelligence comes out of a helmet, being the smartest is not a virtue or an achievement. It is just a setting someone turned up. And the beings who understand that, who know their genius is a dial rather than a destiny, tend to be the most dangerous ones of all. There is a way to measure Rick's intelligence that does not involve counting his inventions at all, and it might be the surest measure available. You look at who Rick respects. Rick has almost no respect for anyone. He treats most of the multiverse as furniture, so the tiny handful of beings he treats as equals, as friends, as people whose judgment he actually values, form a kind of secret ranking of their own, a list of the minds a super genius decided were worth his time. And at the top of that short list, before the series even properly begins, is a warrior named Bird Person. Bird Person is Rick's oldest friend, a comrade from a revolutionary past shown only in fragments, back when Rick was fighting an actual war against an actual empire. And the intelligence Bird Person represents is not invention. He does not build portal guns. His intelligence is wisdom, the accumulated understanding of someone who has lived a long, hard, principled life and paid attention to it. Bird Person speaks in a slow, deliberate way that a lot of people first take for simplicity, and then you realize he is often the wisest voice in any room, the one who understands people, including Rick, better than they understand themselves. He can see Rick clearly, see the loneliness and the self-destruction under the bravado, and he loves him anyway, which is a form of intelligence Rick himself does not possess. Bird Person understands Rick. Almost no one understands Rick. That alone places him in rare company. And Bird Person's story carries one of the cruelest demonstrations of how a superior mind can still be undone by the one thing it did not account for, which is love. Because Bird Person falls in love and marries a woman named Tammy, and Tammy is the trap. Tammy appears throughout the earlier part of the series as an ordinary human teenager, a background presence, someone nobody thinks twice about. And then, in one of the great gut punch reveals, Tammy turns out to be a deep cover agent of the Galactic Federation, the vast empire Rick and Bird Person spent their lives fighting. She was undercover the entire time. The whole relationship, the whole marriage, was a long con intelligence operation, and it culminates in a massacre, an ambush that catches Rick and Bird Person and their entire circle completely off guard. I want to dwell on Tammy for a second because she is easy to dismiss and she is truly one of the sharpest strategic minds in the show, measured by results. Think about what she pulled off. She embedded herself for years, patiently, playing a role so ordinary that no one, not Rick, not Bird Person, not any of the battle-hardened revolutionaries around her, ever suspected a thing. She fooled the galaxy's smartest man socially, sat at his table, and he never smelled it. That is an espionage intelligence of the highest order, the ability to be so completely underestimated that a room full of geniuses looks straight through you, which if it sounds familiar is because it is the exact same weapon Evil Morty uses, the power of being beneath suspicion. Tammy is a smaller, earlier, human-scale version of that same lesson. The person nobody is watching can beat the people everybody is watching. Rick out-invents the Federation constantly, and a Federation agent still walked into his life and blew it apart because Rick was watching for a weapon and she came as a girlfriend. And what the Federation does to Bird Person after the ambush is the grimmest fusion of technology and intelligence the series attempts. They do not simply kill him, they rebuild him, resurrect him as a cyborg, a mechanical version of himself called Phoenix Person, his wisdom and his will replaced with programming, his mind turned into a weapon pointed at the people he loved. The being who understood Rick better than anyone gets his understanding surgically removed and replaced with obedience. It is a horror, and it is also a dark comment on the theme we have been tracing, that intelligence in this world is hardware, editable, and that even the wisest mind can be opened up and rewritten if you have the technology and the cruelty to do it. Then there is unity, and unity is a completely different kind of intelligence, one introduced almost as a thought experiment about what intelligence even is. Unity is a hive mind, a single consciousness that controls thousands or millions of individual bodies at once, assimilating whole populations, whole planets into one coordinated will. When unity takes over a world, every person on it becomes a cell in a single distributed mind. And here's the thing that matters for our ranking. Unity is one of Rick's exes, one of the very few beings presented as a genuine romantic and intellectual equal to Rick, someone he was drawn to and someone who could, crucially, hold their own against him. A being who can think with a million bodies at once, coordinate an entire civilization as a single self, is operating on a scale of parallel processing that even Rick cannot match. Rick's genius is one brilliant mind. Unity is a brilliant mind multiplied across a planet. And something softly devastating gets done with Unity because it is Unity who leaves Rick and Unity who articulates why. This vast, distributed intelligence recognizes that being with Rick is destroying it, pulling it toward his chaos and his self-destruction, and it makes the intelligent choice, the healthy choice, the choice to walk away for its own preservation. That is emotional intelligence operating at planetary scale, and it is aimed pointedly at Rick's inability to do the same for himself. Unity is smart enough to leave Rick. Rick is not smart enough to leave Rick. A million-bodied hive mind demonstrates better self-preservation than the smartest man alive, and that lands without ever being underlined. I should mention Squanchy, too, another of Rick's old circle, though he sits lower on the intelligence scales than Bird Person or Unity. Squanchy reads at first as comic relief, a party animal friend from the old days, but there are hints of more capability under the surface than he shows, a fighter who can turn honestly formidable when the situation demands it. He is not a genius, but he is part of the answer to the same question, which is what kind of beings did Rick choose to surround himself with in the one period of his life he seems to remember fondly? The answer is warriors and wise ones and a hive mind, revolutionaries and equals, and the tragedy threaded through all of it is that this was Rick's peak, the time he had real friends who could match him, and it ended in betrayal and massacre, and he has been alone with lesser company ever since. So what does this whole tier tell us about the ranking? It tells us that Rick's intelligence has a social fingerprint, and you can read it in his friendships. The beings he treated as equals were not other inventors. They were the wise one, the hive mind, the warriors. Rick, given the chance to choose his intellectual peers, did not choose people who could build what he builds. He chose people who had the things he lacks: wisdom, connection, the ability to coordinate and to love and to leave when leaving is smart, which suggests that some part of Rick knows exactly which scale he is failing on, and that the friends he lost were the ones who might have taught him, if the Federation and a girl no one was watching had not taken them away. Not every threat in this show is a mind. Some of them are simply forces, and the way Rick relates to those forces tells you where the edges of intelligence actually are, the places where being the cleverest man alive stops helping you. The purest example is a man who wears a seashell and calls himself the king of the ocean, Mr. Nimbus. Mr. Nimbus is, on paper, absurd. He is theatrical, pompous, dressed in a way that dares you to take him seriously, and a lot of him is played for comedy. But underneath the joke is an actually interesting idea about Rick, because Mr. Nimbus is Rick's self-declared nemesis, and unlike almost every other antagonist, he is a nemesis Rick cannot simply outthink. His power is not intellectual. He controls the ocean, he commands the police, he has a kind of authority and hydrokinetic force that does not respond to being cleverer than it. You cannot invent your way past Mr. Nimbus the way Rick invents his way past everything else, because Mr. Nimbus is not a problem of engineering. He is a problem of raw power operating in a domain where Rick's genius does not grant leverage. And this is the detail that makes him matter, and it comes from behind the scenes. Mr. Nimbus was designed deliberately by one of the show's creators as a character who can beat Rick, and more than that, as someone Rick actually reveres. That is a startling thing to build on purpose. In a series whose entire premise is that Rick is the smartest and most capable being around, the writers sat down and said, "We need someone Rick is afraid of, someone Rick treats with genuine wariness and even respect." And they made him a ridiculous man in a shell. The ridiculousness is the point. It is the story insisting that there exist forces your intelligence simply does not touch, and that a truly smart person knows to be wary of them rather than pretending genius covers everything. Because that is the intelligence lesson buried in Mr. Nimbus, and it is a subtle one. Rick's respect for Nimbus is itself a sign of Rick's intelligence, not a contradiction of it. A lesser mind, a more purely arrogant genius, would refuse to acknowledge that anything could beat it and would walk straight into Nimbus and lose. Rick is smart enough to know the limits of his own smartness. He knows that some threats are not the kind of thing you defeat with a better plan, and he adjusts, treats Nimbus carefully, gives him room. Knowing what your intelligence cannot solve is a higher order form of intelligence than believing it can solve everything, and Rick, for all his arrogance, actually has it. He fears the right things. This connects to a broader truth about where Rick sits that the writing keeps making. Rick is beatable. He is beatable by Rick Prime, who outplanned him. He is beatable by Evil Morty, who outmaneuvered him. He is beatable in a way by Zeep, who matched him. He is beatable by Mr. Nimbus, who simply outpowers him in a domain intelligence cannot reach. and he is beatable, most importantly, by his own emotions, which sabotage him more reliably than any external enemy. The series is generous with Rick's genius, but it is absolutely relentless about the fact that genius is not invincibility, that there are at least 4 or 5 different ways to beat the cleverest man alive, and Rick spends his life aware of most of them, which is part of why he drinks. Mr. Nimbus also sits at the head of a whole category of beings, the ones whose power is not intelligence at all, and it is worth naming the category because it clarifies what we are ranking. There are gods and near gods and cosmic entities scattered through the run, beings of immense power who are not necessarily smart, and power and intelligence are carefully kept as separate axes. The devil that Rick humiliates is powerful but not smart, which is exactly why Rick beats him. Applied science against dumb magic. Mr. Nimbus is powerful and not especially intellectual either, but his power sits in a domain, the ocean and the social order, that Rick's science does not dominate, so Rick cannot repeat the trick. The difference between those two outcomes, Rick crushing the devil and Rick treading carefully around Nimbus, is the whole map of where intelligence wins and where it does not. Intelligence beats power when the power is in a domain you can engineer against. It loses to power that sits outside your tools. Rick knows exactly which is which, and that knowledge is one of the sharpest things about him. So Mr. Nimbus does not rank high on any intelligence scale, and that is fine, because his function is to mark the boundary of the whole ranking. He is the reminder that this list, this entire exercise of ranking characters by how smart they are, only measures one axis of what determines who wins in this universe, and that there is another axis, raw power and domains beyond invention, that runs alongside it and sometimes overrides it entirely. The smartest being in the world still has to be polite to the king of the ocean. And the fact that Rick is polite to him rather than arrogant is one more piece of evidence that his intelligence is real, because only a clearly intelligent person knows precisely where their genius stops working. If you want to see Rick's raw intelligence at its most undeniable, you do not look at him at his best. You look at him crippled, impaired, operating at a fraction of his capacity, and you watch him win anyway, because those are the moments used to prove that his genius is not a costume he puts on, but a thing so fundamental to him that it functions even when everything else has failed. There are 2 of these demonstrations that stand above the rest, and together they make the case better than any speech could. The first involves a team of superheroes called the Vindicators. They are the series parody of a big ensemble hero franchise, a squad of powered do-gooders with names and costumes and a self-important sense of their own importance, Vance Maximus and Supernova and Alan Rails and the rest, plus an intern named Noob who does the unglamorous work everyone else ignores. Rick has a history with this team, a mutual contempt, and in the episode that matters, he is called back to work with them against a villain. And Rick, being Rick, does not want to. So he gets blackout drunk, so drunk he loses entire hours, drinks himself into a genuine void where he has no memory of what he did. And then the team wakes up inside a trap, an elaborate, sadistic, multi-stage series of deadly games, the kind of intricate death puzzle you would associate with a horror franchise built around a mastermind who plans everything to the second. Rooms that test them, challenges that force them to confront their own hypocrisies, traps calibrated precisely to each hero's weakness. And the slow, horrible realization that dawns on everyone is that Rick built all of this. Rick, blackout drunk, with no memory of doing it, constructed an entire brilliant murder labyrinth designed specifically to expose and punish the Vindicators for their flaws. He was so drunk he cannot remember it, and the version of him operating in that blackout was still smart enough to engineer a psychologically precise death trap that outmatched an entire team of superheroes. Think about what that actually claims about Rick's intelligence. It claims that his baseline, the automatic background function of his mind running with the higher faculties switched off by alcohol, is still more sophisticated than the full conscious effort of a squad of powered heroes. His sleepwalking is smarter than their focus. That is an outrageous flex, and it is framed as horror comedy rather than triumph precisely because there is something disturbing about a mind that dangerous even when its owner is not home. And there is a sadness folded in too, because what did drunk, unconscious Rick choose to build with all that genius? Not a cure, not a wonder, but a machine to hurt the people he resents. Even Rick's autopilot is bent toward cruelty and self-isolation. The intelligence is bottomless, and it is pointed, always, in the wrong direction. Noob, the ignored intern, is the quiet counterweight in that whole story, the one character Rick ends up appreciating, the nobody who does the real work while the heroes posture. It is a small thing, but it is the same move made over and over, letting the overlooked ordinary figure be the one worth valuing while the impressive ones reveal themselves as hollow. Rick, for once, sees it and toasts the intern nobody else noticed, which is maybe the kindest thing drunk Rick does all episode. The second demonstration is the one we opened on tonight, the pickle. I am not going to walk through every step of it again because you already have the image. Rick reduced to a limbless green thing on a workbench and clawing his way back to lethality through sheer improvisation, wiring himself into the nervous systems of vermin, building bodies and weapons out of whatever the environment gave him, fighting through an entire armed compound with no resources except his own mind and the corpses of his enemies. As a display of improvisational survival intelligence, it is unmatched anywhere in the series. Drop Rick into the worst possible situation, strip him of everything, take his very limbs, and he will reverse engineer a path back to dominance from nothing. That is the invention scale and the survival scale fused into a single, relentless demonstration. But the reason the pickle matters for understanding Rick's intelligence is not the survival. It is why he did it in the first place. And this is the part the story is actually interested in. Rick turned himself into a pickle to avoid family therapy. The whole absurd ordeal, the vermin and the weapons and the killing, all of it was an elaborate, brilliant, catastrophically effortful way to avoid sitting in a room and talking about his feelings for 1 hour. And the therapist sees it. In the episode's most important scene, a scene with no action in it at all, the family therapist looks at Rick and calmly, precisely takes him apart. She points out that Rick possesses the intelligence to solve any external problem, to build his way out of any physical trap, and that he deploys that intelligence relentlessly for one purpose above all others, which is to avoid the one thing he cannot engineer his way out of, which is the ordinary, unglamorous human work of maintaining relationships and facing himself. That is the thesis of the entire pickle episode, and I would argue the thesis of the whole series' relationship with intelligence. Rick's genius is real, and Rick's genius is also a fortress he has built against intimacy. He would really rather turn himself into a pickle and fight a building full of armed men than be vulnerable in a room with people who love him, because the pickle problem is a problem he can solve, and the therapy problem is not. His intelligence has become the subtlest avoidance mechanism ever depicted, a mind so powerful it can manufacture any distraction, any adventure, any crisis, rather than sit still and feel something. And the therapist, an ordinary human with no gadgets and no genius by Rick's standards, sees straight through all of it, which makes her, in that moment, wiser than the smartest man alive. She has the one kind of intelligence he spent his whole life running from, and she uses it to describe him more accurately than he can describe himself. So the impaired Rick demonstrations, taken together, land somewhere more interesting than just look how smart he is even drunk. They land on the idea that Rick's intelligence and Rick's damage are the same organ. The mind that builds a death maze in a blackout is the mind that cannot stop drinking. The mind that escapes a compound as a pickle is the mind that cannot bear an hour of honesty. You cannot separate the genius from the avoidance because the genius is what makes the avoidance possible on such a spectacular scale. An ordinary man who wants to dodge therapy makes an excuse. Rick makes a saga. The size of the evasion is a direct measure of the size of the intelligence, and also a direct measure of how much there is inside him that he cannot face. That is the cruel arithmetic of the cleverest man alive, and the series has been writing it out for us the whole time. So far, we have ranked individuals, single minds sitting somewhere on a scale, but some of the fiercest intelligences in Rick and Morty are not individuals at all. They are systems, institutions, whole civilizations acting as a single strategic entity, and they are worth their own place in this ranking because they beat Rick in ways no single genius ever manages. The clearest of these is the Galactic Federation, and the way it once conquered Earth is one of the smartest, quietest displays of power in the whole run, precisely because it involves no lasers at all. When the Galactic Federation takes over Earth, it does not do it with an invasion in the usual sense. There is no grand battle for the planet. Instead, the Federation simply absorbs Earth into its bureaucracy. It arrives, installs itself, and reorganizes human civilization from the inside, changing the currency, assigning everyone jobs, folding the entire species into a galactic administrative machine. Overnight, humanity stops being a free planet and becomes a set of employees. And the horror of it, the thing being pointed at, is how bloodless and total it is. You cannot fight a war against a filing system. The Federation understood something a purely military mind would miss, which is that the surest way to conquer a people is not to kill them, but to employ them, to make resistance not so much dangerous as pointless, to bury freedom under paperwork. That is institutional intelligence, and it is far more effective than any weapon Rick ever built, because Rick can blow up a Federation ship, but he cannot blow up a bureaucracy. Now, Rick does eventually break the Federation, and the way he does it is itself a beautiful piece of writing about individual genius versus systemic power. He does not outfight them. He attacks the one thing a bureaucratic empire actually runs on, which is its economy. He devalues their currency, reduces their money to nothing, and the entire Federation collapses not from an explosion, but from insolvency, from an economic shock it cannot absorb. It is Rick recognizing that a system is only as strong as the abstraction holding it together, and pulling that abstraction out from under it. So the confrontation between Rick and the Federation is really a confrontation between two kinds of intelligence: the individual genius who finds the single load-bearing weakness, and the vast institution that wins by having no single point to attack until Rick finds the one it did have. It is one of the few times his intelligence is aimed at a truly worthy structural opponent, and it is thrilling to watch precisely because the Federation is smart in a way Rick is not, and he has to become smart in a new way to beat it. Standing near the head of the human institutional world is President Curtis, the President of the United States, and he is a fascinating placement because he is, by the standards of this show, an ordinary man, and yet he is one of the very few people who gets under Rick's skin on a recurring basis. Rick and the President develop a genuine feud, a running conflict of egos, and what makes it interesting is that the President is not stupid. He is a shrewd, capable political operator, a man who has clawed his way to the strongest office on Earth, and he represents a kind of intelligence Rick has nothing but contempt for and yet cannot fully dominate, which is the intelligence of institutional power, of knowing how to command armies and agencies and public attention. The feud between Rick and the President is the series staging its recurring argument in miniature. Rick can out-invent the President effortlessly, can escape any prison, defeat any force the government sends, and yet the President keeps coming back, keeps mattering because he commands a system and Rick is only one man. Rick treats the presidency as beneath him, a joke, a role for lesser minds, and that arrogance is allowed to be partly right and partly a blind spot. Because the President has something Rick does not, which is the willing, coordinated power of an entire nation. And Rick's contempt for that kind of power, his refusal to take institutional intelligence seriously, is exactly the sort of overconfidence that has cost him before. A truly complete intelligence would respect what a president represents. Rick cannot, and it is one of the small ways the incompleteness of even the greatest individual mind gets marked. There is a deeper point buried in all of this about what intelligence even is when you scale it up past a single person. Rick is the smartest individual in his walled-off multiverse, but a single smart individual is a fragile thing. He gets tired, he gets drunk, he gets emotional, he makes one mistake, and it cascades. A system does not get drunk. A bureaucracy does not grieve. The Federation and the Presidency and the Citadel are all, in their way, attempts to build an intelligence that does not have Rick's weaknesses, a distributed mind with no single heart to break, and Rick keeps getting pitted against these structures precisely to explore whether one brilliant, damaged individual can beat a stupid but tireless collective. The answer it keeps landing on is that he can, but only barely, and only by finding the one human weakness hidden inside the machine, the currency, the ego, the single point of failure. The moment a system has no such weakness, Rick is actually in trouble, and the writing knows it. So on the ranking, the institutions occupy a strange rung all their own. The Galactic Federation is not smart the way Rick is smart, but it is powerful the way Rick can never be, coordinated, patient, and immune to the emotional collapse that undoes him. President Curtis is an ordinary intelligence wielding an extraordinary apparatus. Neither of them outthinks Rick in a straight contest of minds, but both of them expose the ceiling of what individual genius can do, and they stand as proof that in this universe, the smartest thing in the room is not always a person. Sometimes it is a structure, slow and dumb and unkillable. And the fact that Rick keeps having to fight those structures rather than simply dismissing them is one more sign that even the smartest man alive knows. Somewhere under the arrogance that a single mind has limits a system does not. There is one intelligence in Rick and Morty we have not ranked yet, and it is the largest one of all because it contains all the others. It is the show itself, the writing, the mind or minds behind the whole apparatus, deciding what each character knows, what they miss, when to let Morty win and when to let Rick fail, when to reveal that the smartest man alive is only smartest inside a wall he built out of fear. Because here's the thing about a story about intelligence, the story has to be at least as smart as its smartest character, or the illusion collapses. And Rick and Morty mostly clears that bar, which is a real feat to pull off. Consider what the writing has to manage. It has to make Rick convincingly the smartest being alive, which means every one of his plans has to feel like something only a genius could devise. And the only way to write a believable genius is to actually be clever enough to construct the genius's solutions, which the writers have to do episode after episode. Then, harder still, it has to make evil Morty convincingly smarter than Rick, which means outwriting the character they already established as the ceiling. Then it has to make Rick Prime convincingly able to outplan our Rick for decades, and it has to make Zeep convincingly Rick's equal, and it has to do all of this while keeping the continuity of a multiverse with infinite variants straight enough that dedicated fans, the fiercest fact-checkers alive, cannot catch it contradicting itself on the big load-bearing points. That is an enormous intellectual undertaking, and it gets pulled off often enough that the misses are notable rather than routine. The origin of the whole thing is a small, strange fact that I love, because of how little it predicts what the series became. Rick and Morty grew out of a crude parody short, a deliberately vulgar send-up of Back to the Future, in which the Doc and Marty characters were twisted into a grotesque pair for a short film screened at a small creative festival. That is the seed. A rude little joke about an existing movie made for a Los Angeles short film club, and out of it grew a wildly, conceptually ambitious animated series, one that would eventually be walling off sections of infinity and interrogating the relationship between intelligence and despair. The distance between the origin and the destination is itself a kind of intelligence, the ability to take a throwaway premise and keep asking, what if we took this seriously until it became something enormous? The series was created by two people, and their partnership is worth naming because the tension between their sensibilities is part of why the show is smart in the specific way it is. One half of the creative core brought a deep instinct for structure, for the architecture of story, for the way a narrative should be built to mean something, an almost obsessive theory of how episodes and characters and arcs are supposed to work. The other half brought the improvisational, anarchic, performance energy, the voices, the chaos, the willingness to be gross and strange and fast. And the collision of those two things, rigorous structure and unhinged improvisation, is exactly the collision the series is about. Order and chaos, the plan and the impulse, which is also, not coincidentally, the exact tension inside Rick himself. A mind of perfect structural genius married to an utterly chaotic and self-destructive impulse. Rick and Morty is smart partly because it was built by two opposite kinds of intelligence pulling against each other, and it put that same pull inside its main character. I do have to address the real-world event that reshaped the production, and I want to do it the way the series' own honesty about intelligence demands, plainly and without speculation. In 2023, one of the two co-creators, the one who had also been the voice of both Rick and Morty, departed. He had been performing both of the title characters himself, which is its own strange fact, that for years the galaxy's smartest man and his anxious grandson were the same person talking to himself in a recording booth. After his departure, the studio recast both roles. From the 7th season onward, Rick is voiced by an actor named Ian Cardoni, and Morty is voiced by an actor named Harry Belden. And the notable thing, the thing that speaks to the strength of the writing and the craft of the new performers, is how seamless the transition was. The characters survived the loss of the voice that originated them, which tells you that the intelligence of the series was never located in that one performance. It was in the writing, in the conception, in the architecture, and the architecture held. That the series could lose the actor who was, quite literally, the voice of its intelligence and continue without missing a step is a remarkable statement about where the real mind of the thing lives. It was never one person doing a voice, it was a whole writer's room, a structure of ideas, robust enough that the machine kept running when a central part was replaced, which is exactly the kind of resilience the series admires in its institutions and denies to its individuals. Rick and Morty practiced, in its own production, the lesson it keeps teaching in its plots, that a distributed intelligence survives what a single one cannot, and it is not finished, which matters for how we hold all of this. As of now, the series has aired around 90 episodes across 9 seasons, with the 9th season having arrived in 2026, and it has been renewed for a long run ahead, extended all the way through a 12th season in a deal announced back in 2024. That is an unusual commitment for an animated series, a guarantee of years more story, which means every ranking we make tonight is provisional. It has repeatedly proven willing to blow up its own hierarchy, to reveal that the smartest character is not who you thought, to break its own walls. There are seasons ahead in which the whole intelligence map we have drawn could be redrawn again, in which some new mind is revealed above evil Morty, or in which one of the geniuses we have placed at the top is exposed as smaller than we believed. The story is still being written by the intelligence that contains all the others, and that intelligence has never once been sentimental about protecting a character's rank. Here's the take I want to leave you with about the show as a mind, because it is the thing that separates Rick and Morty from 100 other stories about a smart character. Most stories about a genius are written by people pretending to be as smart as their genius, and you can feel the pretense, the moments where the plot bends to let the genius win because the writer could not think of a real solution. Rick and Morty does something braver. It writes a genius and then spends most of its energy on the ways that genius fails, on the emotional stupidity underneath the intellectual brilliance, on all the things a truly smart person still cannot solve. It is easier to write a character who is smart about physics than to write one who is smart about physics and catastrophically stupid about his own heart, and to make both of those true at once, consistently for 9 seasons. The real intelligence here is not in Rick's inventions. It is in the writer's understanding, better than Rick ever will, that being the smartest person in the room is not the same as being right about the things that matter, and building an entire multiverse just to make that one quiet point over and over until you cannot miss it. Everything we have done so far has ranked these characters mostly by the first 2 scales, invention and cunning, the kinds of intelligence that let you build machines and beat opponents. But I promised at the start that there were 4 scales, and I want to stop now and do something the series is constantly daring you to do, which is throw out the first 2 entirely and rank everyone purely by the 3rd one. Emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and connect with other living things. Because when you do that, the list does not just change, it flips. It turns almost perfectly upside down, and the near perfection of that inversion is, I think, the sharpest structural joke in the entire run. Watch what happens to the ranking when you flip it. At the very bottom of the emotional scale, dead last sits evil Morty, the being we placed at the very top of the strategic one. The mind that understood everyone well enough to manipulate and escape them is also the mind that connects to no one, that wants nothing but out, that treats every relationship as a lever. He is the smartest strategist and the emptiest heart, and those 2 facts are the same fact. Just above him, or perhaps beside him, sits Rick Prime, the monster without a wound, who understands emotion perfectly and only ever uses that understanding to destroy. The two beings at the summit of cold intelligence are at the floor of warm intelligence, and you're meant to notice that the climb to the top of one ladder was a climb to the bottom of the other. Then comes our Rick, and Rick's position on the emotional scale is more interesting than either of those two because Rick is not empty. Rick feels enormously. That is his whole problem. He is drowning in grief and love and shame, and what he lacks is not emotion but the ability to handle it, to be present with it, to let another person in without sabotaging the connection. So Rick is not at the very bottom of the emotional scale. He is somewhere in the tormented middle, a man with a full heart and no working instructions for it, which is arguably worse than being empty because emptiness does not hurt and Rick hurts constantly. His intelligence built him a fortress against the one thing he needed, and now he lives in the fortress, safe and alone. And then, as you keep climbing the emotional ladder, the people who are at the bottom of the intelligence ranking start to rise, and they rise in almost exact reverse order. Beth, brilliant and cold, sits low, damaged in the same way her father is. Summer, more balanced, climbs higher, capable of real connection when she chooses it. Morty, for all his anxiety, climbs higher still because Morty really cares, feels guilt, wants to be good, loves the people around him even when they hurt him. And near the very top, in the place that on the intelligence ranking belonged to Rick, sits Jerry. Jerry, the family fool, the man everyone agreed to look down on, is at or near the summit of the emotional scale, capable of the uncomplicated love and connection that every genius in the series would trade their portal gun to feel and cannot. The ranking has turned completely over. The bottom is the top and the top is the bottom. That inversion is not a coincidence, and it is not me forcing a pattern onto the material. It is the central architecture, built on purpose, stated and restated in a dozen different shapes. The series is constructed so that the movement up one scale is the movement down the other, so that intelligence in the invention sense and intelligence in the emotional sense are not just different but seem almost to be in active tension, as though a being only has so much room inside them, and filling it with one kind of understanding crowds out the other. Whether that is a real law of the show's universe or just the tragic pattern of these particular characters is left open, but the pattern is unmistakable. The colder the genius, the emptier the heart. The warmer the heart, the more ordinary the mind. And I want to be careful here because it would be too neat to say the series simply believes that smart people are unhappy and dumb people are kind. It is more precise than that. Look at the exceptions, because the exceptions are where the real argument lives. Bird Person is wise, which is a form of intelligence, and he is also emotionally deep, high on both scales at once, which is presented as a rare and precious combination that then cruelly gets destroyed. Unity is a vast intelligence and also emotionally intelligent enough to leave Rick for its own good, high on both. Doofus Rick is a genius, guaranteed by the curve, and also the warmest Rick alive, high on both. So the claim is not that the two kinds of intelligence cannot coexist. It is that when they do coexist, the world tends to destroy or exile or mock the being who holds them together because a mind that is both brilliant and kind is somehow intolerable to everyone around it. Bird Person is turned into a machine. Unity leaves. Doofus Rick is bullied. The characters who achieve the full spectrum of intelligence are punished for it, and the ones who survive comfortably are the ones who specialized, who went all the way up one scale and let the other wither. That is a darker and more sophisticated idea than the simple smart equals sad formula, and it is why the emotional ranking matters so much. It reveals that the real subject was never how smart these characters are on the invention scale. That was always the easy question, the one with the boring answer where Rick wins. The real question, the one the whole series is softly built around, is whether any of them can hold both kinds of intelligence at once and survive. And the answer it keeps giving is almost never, and only for a little while, and the world will take it from you. Bird Person had it and lost it to a machine. Unity had it and had to walk away. And Rick, who wants it more than anything, who married Unity and befriended Bird Person precisely because they had the thing he lacks, cannot hold it himself. And so he sits in the tormented middle of the emotional scale forever, brilliant enough to build anything and too broken to keep the only things worth having. So if someone asks you who is the smartest character in Rick and Morty, the honest answer is a question back, which is smart on which scale, because there are two rankings and they are mirror images. And the person at the top of the one everybody argues about is at the bottom of the one that actually determines whether a life is worth living. Evil Morty won the cold ranking and lost the warm one. Jerry lost the cold ranking and won the warm one. And I am fully convinced the series thinks Jerry got the better deal and spends 9 seasons trying to convince you of it without ever once saying it out loud. I have been talking about 4 scales, but there is a 5th thing hiding underneath all of them, and it is the one the series cares about most, even though it never gives it a name. Call it wisdom or judgment, the intelligence not of means but of ends. All 4 of the scales we have been using measure how well a character can get what they want. Not one of them measures whether what they want is worth wanting. And that gap between being able to achieve any goal and being able to choose a good one is where the whole thing finally lives, and it is the gap that swallows Rick. Here's the cleanest way to see it. Rick can do almost anything. Give him a goal, any goal, and his intelligence will find a path to it, through the multiverse, through physics, through armies and gods and governments. His means are effectively unlimited, and yet look at what he actually points all that limitless capability toward, across the whole run. He turns himself into a pickle to skip a conversation. He builds a universe to charge a car. He gets blackout drunk and engineers a death trap out of spite. He chases a single act of revenge across decades while the family who loves him waits at home. Rick has the greatest means in the multiverse and some of the worst judgment about what to use them for. And your attention keeps getting dragged to that gap because the gap is the tragedy. It is not that Rick cannot get what he wants. It is that what he wants is so often small or cruel or self-destructive that his genius becomes a magnifying glass held over his own worst impulses. Wisdom is the ability to want the right things, and it is almost completely uncorrelated here with the ability to get them. That is the 5th scale, and once you start ranking characters on it, the list rearranges one final time into what I think is the truest ordering of all. Because on the wisdom scale, the beings who can build anything tend to score terribly, and the beings who can build nothing sometimes score beautifully, and it has nothing to do with how many machines are in their garage. Consider the therapist, the ordinary human with no gadgets, who looks at Rick and understands correctly that all his genius is avoidance. She cannot build a portal gun. She will never travel to another dimension. On every scale we started with, she is nothing, a background human in a world of gods. But she has the 5th kind of intelligence in abundance. She knows what matters. She knows that sitting in a room and being honest is harder and more important than any adventure. And she knows it clearly enough to say it to the smartest man alive and be right. In the only contest the series seems to think is real, she outscores Rick completely, and she does it with nothing but judgment. Consider Bird Person again, not for his wisdom in the abstract, but for its content. Because what made Bird Person wise was not that he knew more facts than Rick. It was that he knew what was worth living and fighting and dying for. That he had a set of values he actually held, loyalty, love, a cause, and that he organized his life around them. Rick knows more than Bird Person about almost everything, and Bird Person knew better than Rick about the one thing that counts, which is what to do with the time you have. That is why Bird Person can see Rick so clearly, and Rick cannot see himself. Wisdom is a kind of sight that intelligence does not grant, and can even blind you to, because the smarter you are, the easier it is to rationalize, to build a clever argument for the thing you already wanted, to use your intelligence to talk yourself out of the wisdom you might otherwise have found. That last point is the sharpest one, and it is where the whole theory of intelligence finally comes into focus. Rick's nihilism, the famous speeches about nothing mattering, are not wisdom. They are the exact opposite of wisdom wearing wisdom's clothes. They are a very intelligent man using his intelligence to construct an elaborate justification for not having to care about anything, because caring hurts and he is too good at building defenses to leave himself undefended. A less intelligent man could not have built such a complete philosophical fortress against feeling, Rick's genius is precisely what allows him to be this unwise because it lets him win every argument, including the arguments against his own healing. He can outreason his therapist, outreason his family, outreason anyone who tries to tell him that the cold worldview is a wound and not a truth. The only thing he cannot outreason is the drinking, because the drinking is his body telling him the truth. His mind refuses, that something matters, that the loss is real, that the nihilism is a lie. He needs to be unconscious to fully believe. So the fifth ranking, the wisdom ranking, is the one that finally explains why the series is not simply a celebration of its own clever hero. On this scale, Rick is near the bottom, not because he is stupid, but because his intelligence is aimed at defending his own unhappiness. Evil Morty and Rick Prime are lower still, minds of total capability pointed at goals of pure emptiness and revenge. And near the top sit the characters with no notable place on any of the other four scales at all. The therapist, bird person, arguably Jerry in his simple way, arguably Summer in her deliberate refusal to become what her family became. The people who are wise are over and over, not the people who are smart, and that is treated as the great, sad joke at the center of existence, that we spend our lives envying the wrong kind of intelligence, chasing the means and ignoring the ends, admiring the man who can build a spaceship while overlooking the woman who knows what the spaceship is for. I said at the very beginning that if you only measure raw invention, the ranking is boring and misses the point. This is the point. There are 5 kinds of intelligence in Rick and Morty, and most of the running time goes to the first 2 because those are the ones that make good television, the inventions and the schemes. But all of the heart goes to the last 3, the emotional, the adaptive, and the wise, because those are the ones that decide whether being smart was ever worth it. And the final answer, the one arrived at from every direction, is that the smartest thing a person can possibly do is figure out what actually matters and go toward it. And that this one crucial act of intelligence is the single thing all its geniuses are too clever to manage. There is one more scale to rank everyone on before we build the final list, and it is the one that gets talked about least, which is strange because in a series where the danger is constant and lethal, it might be the scale that matters most day to day. This is the adaptive one, the survival intelligence, the ability to be dropped into a situation you do not understand, with no plan and no relevant knowledge, and come out the other side alive. It is not invention and it is not strategy. It is closer to a reflex, a way of thinking on your feet so fast and so well that catastrophe keeps failing to kill you. And when you rank the cast on this scale, you get yet another completely different order, and this one has a lesson in it about who actually inherits the story. The top of the adaptive scale is not a genius inventor. It is Morty. I have said this already, so I will not belabor it, but it deserves its place in the formal ranking because Morty has survived more direct, personal, no-way-out danger than any other character, and he is still here, still functional, still recognizably himself. He does it not by out-inventing the threat, but by adapting to it in real time, making the fast, ugly call, improvising a path where there is no path. That is a skill, and it is a skill that does not depend on being the smartest person in the room, which is exactly why it belongs to the boy everyone assumed was the dumbest. The adaptive scale rewards a specific kind of nerve and pattern reading that the invention scale does not measure at all, and Morty has it in a quantity that outstrips his grandfather. Because here is a truly interesting wrinkle. Rick is also enormous on the adaptive scale, arguably second only to Morty, and we saw why when we talked about the pickle and the compound, the way he can rebuild himself from nothing when stripped of everything. Rick's survival intelligence is monstrous. But notice the difference in flavor between his version and Morty's. Rick survives by turning his invention genius toward improvisation, engineering his way out even with no tools, which means his adaptive skill is downstream of his raw intelligence, an application of it. Morty's survival has no invention underneath it at all. Morty survives on pure adaptive instinct, with nothing to fall back on, which arguably makes his the purer and more remarkable form of the skill, because it is not borrowed from another scale. Rick adapts because he is a genius. Morty adapts because he is a survivor, and those are not the same engine, even when they produce the same result. Then there is Space Beth, and Space Beth belongs very high on this scale, because whichever version of Beth she is, original or clone, she chose a life of constant danger out in the galaxy, and she thrives in it. She is a hardened operator, a fighter, someone who has spent years in exactly the kind of high-stakes survival situations that would break most of the family. Beth always had the raw intelligence, but Space Beth developed the adaptive edge to go with it, and the combination makes her one of the ablest pure survivors in the whole cast. A genuine action hero grade mind that can both think and react. And her existence poses the quiet question the clone story always poses, which is whether Earth Beth, sitting at home doing surgery, has the same adaptive capacity lying dormant, never called upon. Because if the two Beths are truly identical, then the surgeon at home is a latent galactic warrior who simply never had the reason to become one. The capability was always there. Life just did not ask for it. Summer sits higher on this scale than on any other, which is part of why I keep coming back to her as the family's dark horse. Summer adapts. She does not panic the way Jerry does. She picks up alien situations fast. She keeps her head. She is not the top of the adaptive scale, but she has no collapse point on it either. No place where she simply falls apart, and that reliability under pressure is its own kind of intelligence. The kind that keeps you alive not through brilliance but through steadiness. And Jerry, predictably, is at the bottom, because Jerry panics, Jerry freezes. Jerry is the one member of the family whose survival in a crisis usually depends on someone else. The adaptive scale is the one scale where Jerry's emotional intelligence does not save him, because a crisis moves faster than empathy, and this is the honest cost of being the gentle one. Gentleness is not a survival trait in a universe full of things trying to kill you. But here's what the adaptive ranking reveals that none of the others do, and it is the reason I saved it for last before the final list. The adaptive scale is the one where the family beats the geniuses. Think about it. On invention, the top is all Ricks and Zeep, and the family is nowhere. On cold strategy, the top is Evil Morty and Rick Prime, and the family is nowhere. But on adaptive survival, the top of the entire cast is Morty, an ordinary teenager, followed closely by Space Beth and by Rick, with Summer holding steady in the upper middle. The family owns this scale, and the show seems to believe this is the scale that decides who is still standing when the credits roll on the whole saga, because the multiverse does not ultimately reward the being who can build the grandest machine or execute the coldest plan. It rewards the being who can take a hit, adapt, and keep going, and that is a family trait, not a genius one. That is why I think the adaptive scale, quiet as it is, might be the secret bet on who wins in the end. The cold geniuses at the top of the strategic ranking, Evil Morty out in the true multiverse, Rick Prime with his devices, are formidable and also brittle in their way, defined by a single obsessive goal, and a being defined by one goal can be broken by the loss of it. The adapters have no such fragility. They do not need the plan to survive because they never had a plan to begin with. They just keep finding a way. And if you want to guess who will still be alive and still be themselves when Rick and Morty finally ends, whenever that is, the smart money is not on the smartest character. It is on whoever can adapt. And the one who adapts best is a nervous boy who screams a lot and never once gives up. Before I give you the final ranking, I have to come back to the number because I raised it briefly with Rick and it deserves its own moment. If you have spent any time reading about how smart Rick is, you have run into a specific claim, usually stated with total confidence, that Rick Sanchez has an intelligence quotient of some particular enormous figure. This is the single place where fan certainty and actual fact diverge most sharply. There is no official number. The series has never given Rick or Evil Morty or any character a canonical intelligence score, and it never will because it is far too careful for something that clumsy. Every figure you have seen is invented by a fan, and if you look at what those fans have invented, the range alone tells you how meaningless the exercise is. Some blogs settle on a figure in the low hundreds, something that at least gestures at the scale of real human genius. Others push it higher, into ranges no human has ever approached, and some go completely unmoored, throwing out numbers in the many hundreds, or even into the thousands, as though intelligence were a quantity that simply keeps climbing as long as you keep adding zeros. The spread between the low estimates and the high ones is enormous, and that spread is the tell. When the guesses for a single character range across a factor of 5 or 10, what you are looking at is not measurement. It is people picking a number that feels impressive and attaching it to the character they admire. For a sense of scale, the highest figures ever seriously attributed to a real human being sit somewhere around 200, and even those are heavily disputed by the people who actually study this, because the tests were never designed to measure that far out, and the numbers stop meaning much at the extremes. So when someone tells you Rick's score is 400 or 600, they are describing a quantity that has no real-world referent at all, a number that could not be produced by any test that exists applied to a fictional being who was never tested. It is fan fiction with a decimal point. And this is why the refusal to name a number is itself a mark of the show's intelligence. A number would ruin Rick. The moment you assign him a specific score, his genius becomes a quantity, and a quantity can be compared, ranked, and beaten arithmetically. Evil Morty would just need a higher number. Rick Prime would need a higher one still. The whole rich, ambiguous, argued over question of who is smartest, the question this entire video exists to explore, would collapse into simple subtraction. Rick's intelligence is kept unmeasured precisely so that it stays a mystery, so that the answer to how smart is Rick has to be given in scenes and consequences rather than digits, so that you have to think about what intelligence even means instead of just reading a scoreboard. The number hunting also misses the entire point we have spent all this time building, which is that intelligence here is not one quantity at all. It is at least 5 different things that do not reduce to a single figure. What number would you even assign, and to which scale? Rick's invention score and Rick's wisdom score are almost opposites. A single number would have to average them, and the average would be a lie, because the whole tragedy of Rick is that he is not average anywhere. He is at the ceiling of one thing and the floor of another, and the distance between those two extremes is the character. Flatten him to one number and you delete the person. The people demanding a canonical figure for Rick are asking the story to destroy the exact thing that makes him interesting, and it wisely refuses them. So when we build the final ranking now, we are not going to pretend there is a scoreboard. There is no number for Rick and there is no number for anyone, and anyone who gives you one is guessing and dressing the guess as fact. What there is instead is something better and harder, a set of scales, a handful of clear cases, and a story that has thought more carefully about what intelligence is than almost anything else on television. That is what we will rank with, not digits, judgment, which is, appropriately, the exact kind of intelligence the series values most. So let me actually build the ranking now, top to bottom, the way the title promised, with the honest understanding that any single ordering is a compromise between scales that do not agree with each other. I'm going to give you the composite, the ranking as most viewers mean it when they ask who is smartest, which leans on raw intelligence and effectiveness, and then I'm going to tell you where it lies to you because it does. At the very top, the apex of the composite ranking stands Evil Morty, not because he can build the most, but because he understood the most and beat everyone who could build more than him. He outthought the entire society of Ricks, took control of it, and broke out of the walled multiverse that no Rick ever escaped. On the intelligence that decides outcomes, comprehension fused with cold execution, and unhobbled by any emotional weakness, he is the strongest mind ever put on screen here. And I want to stress again that this is the dominant reading rather than a line the series states, but it is a reading with overwhelming support in the events themselves. Just below him, essentially tied and separated only by circumstance, sit the 2 apex Ricks, Rick Prime, and our own Rick, C-137. On raw invention, they are the ceiling of the entire multiverse, the only 2 beings to invent portal travel independently, matched by no one. Between the 2 of them, Rick Prime edges ahead on the composite, because he outplanned our Rick for decades, and because his intelligence is not sabotaged by the grief that constantly undermines ours. Our Rick has the same raw ceiling and a broken instrument to play it on. Rick Prime has the same ceiling and no such flaw, only an emptiness that functions, for the purposes of winning, as an advantage. So the order at the top is Evil Morty, then Rick Prime, then our Rick, and the thing all 3 have in common is that their supremacy is built on some form of emotional absence or emotional wreckage. Nobody reaches the top of this ranking with their heart intact. Then comes the tier of the near equals, the minds that approach the apex without quite reaching it. Zeep Zanflorp belongs here, the only non-Rick to independently reproduce Rick's signature act of genius. A being who on pure invention sits on the same tiny plateau as the top Ricks and falls short only on the accumulated cunning of a hunted life. The wider society of Ricks belongs in this tier too. As a class, every one of them a super genius by human standards, guaranteed by the curve to be the smartest thing in their home reality, including the one they call Doofus, who is smarter than his bullies will ever admit and wiser than all of them combined. And the engineered minds flicker at the edges of this tier, Snowball the dog at his enhanced peak, a genuine superintelligence for as long as the power held, proof that this whole ranking sits on the unsettling fact that intelligence here can be poured out of a helmet. Below that sits the tier of the exceptional specialists, the beings who are enormous on one scale and ordinary on the rest. Unity, a distributed mind of planetary scale, brilliant in parallel and wise enough to leave. Bird person, whose intelligence is wisdom rather than invention, and who scores on scales the geniuses above him have abandoned. Tammy, no inventor at all but a strategic and deceptive intelligence good enough to fool the smartest man alive for years. And Beth, the family's clear number 2 in raw terms, a trained surgeon with a real slice of Rick's mind, split now into 2 equally real selves. The surgeon and the warrior, neither of them the copy. Then the human family in the middle, and this is where the composite ranking starts openly fighting with itself. Morty, near the bottom on invention and near the top on adaptation and survival. Impossible to place with a single number, a boy who looks like the dumbest person in the room and keeps turning out to be the one still standing. Summer, the most balanced of them all, no towering peak and no fatal collapse. Quite possibly the family member with the best actual chance at a good life. And then, at the bottom of the composite ranking, the ranking everyone uses, sits Jerry, last in invention, last in cunning, the family fool. And that is exactly where the composite ranking lies to you, because it puts Jerry at the bottom and on the scale that actually decides whether a life was worth living. Jerry is near the top and the men above him are near the floor. Flip to the emotional scale and Jerry rises and the geniuses fall. Flip to the wisdom scale and the therapist with no gadgets outscores Rick, and bird person outscores everyone who ever out-invented him. And Rick's brilliant nihilism reveals itself as the least wise position going. Flip to the adaptive scale and the family owns the top and the cold strategists look brittle. There is no single true ranking. There are 5 of them and they contradict each other on purpose. And the contradiction is the whole point. If you force me to give one answer, the truest thing I can say is this. On the question of who can do the most, it is evil Morty, then the apex Ricks, then the rest in the order I gave. But on the question the series actually cares about, who is smart in the way that matters, the way that lets you build a life instead of just a machine, the ranking nearly inverts, and the people we spent the evening looking down on turn out to have the one kind of intelligence none of the geniuses could buy, engineer, or steal. And I think the honest verdict is that if you had to pick which ranking to be at the top of, you would be a fool to choose the first one, which is of course exactly the choice every genius in it made, and exactly why not one of them is happy. There is a pattern running underneath this whole ranking that I have been circling all evening, and now that the list is built, I want to name it directly, because it might be the darkest thing this series believes about intelligence. In Rick and Morty, almost every catastrophe is caused by a smart character, not a stupid one. The disasters do not come from the fools. They come over and over from the geniuses, and the smarter the genius, the larger the disaster. Intelligence here is not primarily a force for good that occasionally goes wrong. It is the main engine of harm, and the beings we have ranked at the top are, by the same measure, the ones responsible for the most damage. Trace it through. The multiverse gets broken open, its guiding wall torn down by evil Morty, the smartest strategist in the story. A woman is erased from all of infinity by Rick Prime, the coldest genius, using a device only a mind at the ceiling of invention could build. Whole civilizations are enslaved inside batteries by Rick and independently by Zeep, 2 of the ablest inventors alive, each treating a universe of living beings as a power cell. A species of dogs is nearly driven to overthrow humanity because Rick, casually, made one of them too intelligent to stay a pet. The Galactic Federation conquers Earth not through brute stupidity, but through the sophisticated intelligence of bureaucracy. Point at any of the great calamities, and you will find at the source of it not a lack of intelligence, but a surplus of it, aimed carelessly or cruelly or simply without regard for who gets hurt. Meanwhile, look at who causes the least harm. Jerry, the family fool, has a body count of essentially nothing. His worst crimes are embarrassing, not catastrophic. He has never enslaved a universe, never erased anyone from existence, never accidentally armed a species. His limitations keep his damage small because you cannot cause a multiversal disaster if you cannot build a multiversal device. The gentle, unremarkable people in this world leave the lightest footprint on it, and the brilliant ones leave craters. The correlation is almost perfect, and it runs in the direction nobody wants to admit. The more intelligent the character, the more dangerous they are, not despite their intelligence, but because of it, because intelligence is leverage, and leverage in the hands of someone who is wounded or empty or simply indifferent becomes a weapon pointed at everything around them. This reframes the entire idea of ranking these characters by how smart they are, because it means the ranking is also, underneath, a ranking of who has done the greatest damage. To place Evil Morty and the Apex Ricks at the top of the intelligence list is to place them at the top of the harm list at the same time. The two lists are nearly the same list, and that should sit uncomfortably because we tend to admire intelligence, to root for the clever character, to want to be the smartest person in the room, and the series keeps showing us that the smartest people in its rooms are the ones who break the most, hurt the most, and end up alone. It is not a celebration of genius, it is closer to a warning about it, dressed up as a comedy about a genius so that the warning goes down easy. And notice that the intelligent characters do not get let off the hook by being well-meaning. Rick does not usually cause disasters while trying to help. He causes them while avoiding therapy, while getting drunk, while chasing revenge, while being too clever to sit still. The harm is not the tragic cost of noble ambition. It is the byproduct of a powerful mind pointed at petty or selfish or wounded goals, which brings us right back to the fifth scale, the wisdom scale, the one that measures whether your ends are any good. The reason the geniuses cause so much harm is that their enormous means are attached to poor judgment about what to want, and a huge capability serving a small or cruel desire is precisely the recipe for a catastrophe. Give a wise person modest ability and they do modest good. Give a foolish person enormous ability and they crack the multiverse. The series would rather you were the first than the second, and it spends 9 seasons making the second look as lonely and hollow as it can. So if there is a single sentence that holds this whole ranking together, it might be this. In the universe of Rick and Morty, being smart is not the same as being good, or wise, or happy. And it is very often the opposite of being safe to stand next to. The beings at the top of the intelligence ranking are the beings who have hurt the world the most, and the beings at the bottom are the ones you would actually want in your life. That is the trade the series keeps laying in front of you, and the reason it is such a good show is that it never quite tells you which side to choose. It only makes absolutely sure you understand the cost of choosing the clever one. I want to turn the whole thing around one more time before we close because there is a final intelligence in this show that we have not ranked, and it is yours. The person watching. Rick and Morty is built, very deliberately, as a mirror, and the character you find yourself defending when you argue about who is smartest tells you something about which kind of intelligence you secretly value most, and that turns out to be a more revealing question than any ranking of the characters themselves. Think about who you instinctively side with. If you find yourself thrilled by Rick, wanting to be Rick, quoting Rick, then some part of you has decided that raw capability is the thing worth having. The ability to know more and build more and never be at anyone's mercy. And there is a warning waiting for you inside that identification because the series will spend season after season showing you exactly where that wish leads. To the loneliest room in the multiverse, and it will keep asking gently whether you still want it once you have seen the price. The people who love Rick most are often the ones the writing is most carefully trying to talk out of becoming him. If instead you find yourself drawn to Evil Morty, to the cold clarity of a mind that sees the whole rigged system and simply walks out of it, then you value a different thing: freedom, the refusal to be used, the intelligence of seeing through the game. And there is a warning there too, quieter and colder, which is that the price of that clarity is everything warm, that the being who sees through all illusions may find there was nothing left worth keeping once the illusions were gone. Evil Morty got exactly what he wanted, and you are left to sit with how empty getting it looks. And if you find yourself maybe a little embarrassed, siding with Jerry or with Summer, or rooting for Morty not when he is brilliant, but when he is just decent, then you have landed on the thing this series believes in most, and it will not embarrass you for it. It will, if anything, reassure you. Because the whole elaborate machine of it, the infinite multiverse and the walled curve and the geniuses ranked in tiers, was built to deliver one unfashionable idea, which is that the kind of intelligence worth wanting is not the kind that lets you conquer the universe. It is the kind that lets you love the people in your kitchen and be loved back, that lets you want small, ordinary things and actually enjoy them, that keeps you soft enough to be hurt, because being hurt is the cost of being close to anyone at all. That is why I think this show, underneath the sci-fi and the cruelty and the jokes, is secretly one of the kindest things on television. It takes the cleverest man in the multiverse, and it does not let you envy him. It shows you every gift he has, and then it shows you patiently that he would trade all of it for the one thing the fool in the family already has, and does not even know is precious. And it lets you decide on your own, without ever lecturing you, which of them you would rather be when the lights are off and the adventures are over, and it is just you and the people you love, in a quiet house at the end of a long day. There is one last thread I want to pull before we close, because it is the smartest move available to any character in the story, and almost nobody notices it is on the table. For Morty, the smartest thing he could ever do is leave, not adapt, not survive another adventure, not outthink Rick in a crisis, but simply walk away from the whole arrangement, because the arrangement is built to keep him small. We established early that a Morty's mind camouflages a Rick's, that the pairing exists in part because the boy hides the grandfather, and that Rick has every incentive to keep Morty anxious and dependent and convinced he is the dumb one, which means the healthiest, and therefore, in these terms, the wisest, thing Morty could do is recognize the machine he is inside and step out of it, the way one Morty already did, though that one stepped out into cold revenge rather than a free life. That is the quiet possibility the series keeps dangling and keeps declining to resolve. Every so often it shows you a Morty who has grown, who stands up to Rick, who glimpses how much is actually in him once the self-doubt is stripped away. And then it lets him slide back into the passenger seat, because it is honest about how hard it is to leave the person who both damaged you and needs you. Leaving would be the intelligent act. Staying is the human one. And the tension between those two, between the smart move and the loving move, is the same tension we have found in every character tonight. Only here it is the most sympathetic version of it. A good kid who could probably save himself if he could only believe he was worth saving. I think about that whenever people call Morty the least intelligent member of the main cast, because it gets the whole thing backwards. Morty is not failing an intelligence test by staying. He is passing a different one, a test of loyalty and love that the geniuses around him would all fail, because not one of them has ever chosen a person over an advantage. Rick chose revenge over his family for decades. Evil Morty chose freedom over every attachment he ever had. And ordinary Morty, the screaming boy in the rankings basement, keeps choosing the people in his life over his own escape, again and again. And the story cannot quite decide whether that makes him the biggest fool in the family or the only one who ever understood what intelligence was actually for. And so we come to the end of it, the whole ranking laid out, from the boy who screams his way through nightmares and keeps surviving to the strategist who understood the geniuses better than they understood themselves and walked out through their wall. If you are still awake, I hope the shape of it has settled over you the way it settled over me, which is less as a scoreboard and more as a quiet argument the series has been making patiently for the better part of a decade, that the thing we call being smart is not one thing at all, and that the version of it we most admire may be the version that exacts the highest price to have. It is strange to think about where this show sits now in the wider culture, because it arrived as something crude and small, a vulgar little parody made for a room full of friends, and it grew into a series that a lot of very intelligent, very lonely people calmly recognize themselves in. That is its real place, I think, not as the smartest show on television, though it often is, but as the one that understood something specific and painful about intelligence. That being the cleverest person you know is not a solution to anything, that a mind can be a gift and a prison in the same breath. That the people who see the furthest are often the ones who can bear the least. It said that to a generation that grew up being told the smart kid wins, and it said gently, no, the smart kid is usually the one hurting. And here's what it costs, and here is the quiet, ordinary happiness you're overlooking while you chase the other thing. The series is not finished. There are more seasons coming, more chances for it to move the ceiling again, to reveal some new mind above the ones we ranked tonight, or to finally let one of its geniuses learn the thing the therapist tried to teach and put the fifth kind of intelligence to use before the credits roll for good. I hope it does. I hope somewhere in the seasons ahead, the smartest man in the universe manages the one impossible act of intelligence he has never pulled off, which is to sit still in a quiet room with the people who love him and simply let himself be there. It would be the hardest thing he has ever done, and by the story's own logic, the smartest. For now, though, it is late, and you have made it all the way to the end, and that is a good place to stop. Let the questions stay open. Let Rick be brilliant and broken. Let evil Morty be free and empty. Let Jerry be a fool, and let him be happy anyway. And let yourself drift off somewhere in the middle of all of them, on whichever scale you like best. There is no test in the morning. There is no number to hit. There's just the quiet and the slow certainty that the smartest thing any of us ever does is figure out what actually matters and hold on to it, which none of the geniuses could manage, and which you, half asleep at the end of a long night, might already understand better than all of them. Thank you for spending this time here with me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.